be on the channel. So we're good. Hello. Welcome to the show where we are all alcoholics and drinking and talking about A Song of Ice and Fire. I have a non-Game of Thrones copyrighted. Why am I echoing my own ears? Because I have the stream up. Because I'm terrible.
Rookie mistake.
It's because you're drinking.
These two have Game of Thrones branded liquor. I do not. So we will just pretend that I do. And welcome back.
Also, you're not wearing a Game of Thrones sweater. You're just... Are you even a fan?
You don't recognize this from season 2? Come on.
I was like, wait, what?
Like, the direwolves don't look like that in when I imagine them.
They do in my head, canon. All right, so A Clash of Kings. Nothing really happened in this book, right? We can just talk about the next one.
Oh, man. What a sequel.
So we know that Jimmy here has 6 pages of notes, as he just told us.
Do you want to just read through them real quick while me and Alex drink, and then we can actually get to chatting?
I was actually hoping that you prepared a PowerPoint that we could follow along.
Yeah.
I mean,
kick back.
I do have a PowerPoint. No, I'm just kidding.
This is like basically like we all came to class and we're hoping that Jimmy, the class nerd, just takes up the entire class time with his project, so we just don't get called on. Like, oh, we don't have time for anyone else's project today. Oh no.
Just take one for the team. That's all.
All right, so where do we want to start? I know you have the notes to guide us, but where should we start? First of all, this is another great book, of course, and coming back to these is just eye-opening how good they were.
Yeah.
Because it's been so long for me since I've read them anyway. And then having watched the show and having all that like in my brain, because I've seen that so many times, and being able to see everything that was on screen adapted and like the differences, super fun. But Vienna, where do you want to start? Haha.
I think the beginning's always a good place to start.
It absolutely
that's kind of standard. That's fine.
Let's start at the end.
I mean, the prologue is phenomenal.
It is.
I do like how the prologue is, I mean, like just like with the first book, that it's a thing that the prologue isn't from one of the main POVs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Who's jingling?
My cat, who decided to find her jingliest toy.
Classic.
It's very festive.
So let's talk about the prologue then.
I mean, the prologue is essentially a short story in itself. It has its own climax. It has a little bit of a twist, right? And it establishes characters in a way that are very memorable. And it feels like a really natural way of expanding your story. And George is phenomenal at expanding scope without making it feel exposition-y, without making it feel overwhelming. I mean, there's so many times. Actually, a really good example of this, I think. I just read Thomas Covenant, or part of Thomas Covenant, book 1.
Yeah.
Lord Foulsbane.
Priest of what?
It's like
Priest of Bones?
No. It's the Thomas Covenant from Stephen Donaldson. It's Lord Foulsbane. It's written like the 70s.
No.
It's a controversial work for multiple reasons, but I feel like in that book, like I actually put it down because I'm not ready for it. But it's just like he just dumps things on you every chapter, right? And the world is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but it's just like he just dumps it, and I'm not meshing with it at all. It feels like I'm being told about it, whereas like through this new POV, George is showing you a whole new group of people in a new location, and like I said, it has a climax. Like the prologue is a short story. And there's just tons of lore and history that's getting, fleshed out, and it's just deep. It's a great prologue.
I mean, it's a great way to introduce you to, Stannis and Dragonstone and all the Red Priestess.
Well, a whole nother religion.
Like
in the first book, you had like the old gods with the weirwood, and you have the sept, and you have like, okay, those are the 2 religions. But now we're like, okay, we're gonna add a third. And then later we're gonna add a 4th. Like just like add in your religious studies as we go.
Yeah, and religion plays such a big role in A Song of Ice and Fire, and this is the book where it really comes out. Like it's obviously old gods, new gods are talked about in the Game of Thrones. I think there's a little bit of a mention of lore in book 1, but here we actually see this daunting priestess, Melisandre, who is Is it Melisandre or Melisandre or
Well, if you're going
Melisandre?
by the audiobook, he goes Melisandre.
Yeah, he messes me up because I listen to a lot of it.
Speaking of the audiobook, so like I wanted to read the physical book and I did for most of it, but like I ran out of time, so I switched to audio and I was like, oh god, because he's not good. And him saying Brian
of
for Brienne, and I'm like,
and Pitaya.
I love the way he says
Baelish.
Jamie with a sh sound. He goes Jamie.
Yeah, the audiobook's a trip. I listen to it literally because it's funny.
It's nostalgia for me because like I've listened to him before, and it's just like it's like your crazy uncle.
And like all of the Northerners sound like a bad parody of a pirate. It's not good.
I think I said it in Discord. Tyrion sounds like Elmer Fudd. Like
don't ruin this for me.
Like there's certain scenes where he's just like he sounds like a little scrunched up curmudgeon. I'm just like, well, what is this voice? Because of course, all I'm picturing is Peter Dinklage.
Yeah,
and it's not the same. But yeah, I mean, so you get introduced, and it's interesting seeing like the little differences and the subtle changes that they made from like book to show. Just like the scene of like the poison wine and Melisandre actually being like, you don't have to do this, and then him drinking it and dying horribly. And just like the little subtle changes of like what Stannis writes in his letter. And I mean, Stannis is just, I think they did a great job of portraying him on screen because he's just kind of a dick. And like, yeah, he's like in line for the throne, like it should be his, but he's just like, yeah, like I'm supposed to be on the throne. Everyone should just obey me now. Like, oh, my brother Renly, screw him. He's going to join me. Like, send the Ravens. Everyone's just going to join me because I'm Stannis. Just like
Stannis the Manus.
Is this who Jimmy wants on the throne?
Well, listen,
This psycho.
I'm Team Renly, but when Renly eats the dust, I'm going to go with the rightful heir, and that is Stannis Baratheon.
Well, it is kind of amazing how quickly Renly bites the dust. Like they like set
It
this
seems
up
way faster,
and like they set this up as like these are gonna be the ones, and already one is gone. Oh god, okay, what?
Yep.
Who's left?
Yeah, and when we think about, because obviously we have all the context of the rest of the books and stuff, but if we really take a step back and we think about this as a individual entry and like when it came out, Stannis was such a big figure in book one that was never on page, but everyone kept saying, oh, Stannis, it was like a hard man. And as soon as we meet him, the fact, like, people will tell us someone is hard and cold. I felt the chill through the page whenever Stannis arrives, and the way Davos reveres him, cut off my finger. It's like, dude, Stannis is
also it's interesting
kind of
that we
lunatic.
never get anyone that's like a king. We never get their perspective. The only like potential ruler's perspective you have is Daenerys. But like, you don't get Robert, you don't get Stannis, you don't get Robb, you don't get the kings. You just get people around them to be the eyes on it.
That's one of the greatest changes I think that the show did, though, was because we're always going to mention, comparing the show to the books.
Sorry, there's a show of it?
Yeah, right. Giving you those extra POVs that you don't actually get to see in the books. And, Robb being a super impactful one because like he's out winning all these battles and you're not really seeing any of it. You hear a lot of it from like Catelyn and that's really it. And then even like Blackwater, as impactful as it is, and I know Jimmy loves it, it's much less of a focus in a way than it is. Cause like shows always go for like the big spectacle, right? Like later on when we get to like Hardhome, like barely is a thing in the books, but like it's like a full.
Well, it's the kind of thing that like it's a rare writer that can write a cinematic battle in a way that you're not just like head hopping and then bogged down in a description. Like it's just not a strong suit of books in general.
Yeah, and George actually does not like writing battles.
It's hard to do.
You can tell there's a lot of like cutaways or just like, hey, this happened. Like moving on.
Well, again, like it's easy to like show a bunch of different things going on, but a book can only tell you about one thing at a time. And so like to try to tell you everything that's happening.
Make it choppy. Well, see, I know you don't like John Gwynn. Jimmy and I do, and I think he writes battles incredibly well and does that bouncing.
Well, we're almost 10 minutes in, and I'm gonna say Joe Abercrombie writes battles really well.
Here it is.
I actually, as a reader, I don't actually really enjoy battles. It's very few and far between. And my channel, I talked about Gwen a lot when I first started out. So people thought I was like really into like people would say, "Oh, you're really into like books that have combat." And I'm like, not really, actually. Like if you look at stuff I've read, like the Dagger and the Coin barely has action in it, and it's
I
like
feel
one of my
like
favorites.
combat adjacent things are really interesting because, like, I mean, also Pierce Brown, the way he talks about writing battles, I was like, yeah, you get it. Because he was talking about how, like, the thing that makes a battle interesting to you, especially in books and film as well, but at least, film can just deliver just spectacle, just things booming and crashing. But, like, in a book in particular, like, what makes you invested in this battle is the emotional journey that a character is on and how this changes them and how where they are at with this. So, like, to always have the battle through the lens of how this is affecting the character and not just telling you about things that are like exploding or whatever, but like how this affects their emotional state or like how they're reacting to it. And that's what you like latch onto in a battle. So like I think I mean obviously Abercrombie is like known for being a good character driven writer, so like that's obviously his approach to battle. And I
Are we
think
gonna have to start doing like a shots every time you say Joe Abercrombie or First Love?
You're welcome to.
We'd already be at 2, so maybe it's not the best idea.
I think the best battles, and I think Blackwater falls into this, is whenever the battle itself becomes a character almost, especially when you're seeing it from both sides. This obviously we get pretty much. Well, we do get Davos, right? So we get Davos and Tyrion, Sansa within the the keep, but the battle.
Well, I mean, he also does a good job of like withholding information without it feeling like you're being cheated. You know what I mean? Because like you get to see Tyrion piecing together his plan for this battle. So you have glimpses of what it's not just like, I'm doing a thing and you know nothing about it, but I'm planning it. Like you get to see things he's doing. Like, he's building a chain. You're not super sure why. He's like looking into the wildfire. So like you're like, I can see, I guess, kind of, I know it's going to be probably on the water. So you could, in theory, if you know enough about battle tactics, you could start to formulate like what would be his plan. Yeah. But it never actually tells you what his plan is so that you can be surprised with Davos when he's experiencing the battle and what the strategy was.
The relaying of information is one of the strongest suits of this entire series. It like just the way he reveals, like he sprinkles it in, like the Kingsguard right out to meet Yoren. And as the reader with our information, we think they're after Arya because we don't know that they've been sent out to get all the bastards from Robert, right? But if you're paying attention, you can kind of piece together like, oh, he's actually here for Gendry. And then we see the scenes later where Tyrion's disgusted by what happened, and then Janos Slynt gets sent off. So like he kind of starts building those scenes way earlier, and we don't have that context. Another thing that he does is, and this happens with the comet, which is in the prologue. The comet, people have different visions of it
differently.
Yeah, and everybody sees it at a different time.
Yep.
And George is really good at that. And then Danny finds out in this book that Robert's died, like way after. We're like, duh. But what he does with that sometimes is he will remind the reader of something he wants you to remember. And other authors will just point blank tell you stuff over and over and over again. And I hate it. But what Gurm does is Catelyn figures out that her 2 youngest boys have been murdered through a raven. So without someone just going, well, you know that the 2 boys have been killed. It's like she's finding out, and we see her reaction to that event while still being reminded, oh, yeah, that's right. Like they might be dead. So,
or also, I mean, like when you just mentioned Danny finding out that Robert is dead, like the fact that it makes it without having to say, this remote place always gets news late and may not even get the full story until much later. No, they just show Danny gets this news way later. And at the point she's getting the news, they don't know that Ned is dead. Yeah. They're like, he's been arrested for treason. And like, he died. He's definitely dead. This is
I love Jorah's reaction to that too, because he's like, treason. He's like, Ned Stark. He's like, there's no way.
He's like, I hate that guy, but he didn't do it.
Yeah. He's like, that's kind of like, he's the worst because he'd never commit treason.
He's not that cool. It's interesting too, though. So you mentioned like the Kingsguard hunting the bastards. But like the book, it was Cersei. And like the show, again, like little subtle changes made it Joffrey's decision to do it and making him more of like an outright monster. Cersei is like way more sinister at this point in the books because like she's really got her hand.
We didn't talk about this in the Game of Thrones chat, but like the show added in the fact that Cersei had one of Robert's children, and that is not true in the books. So like they did a lot to kind of a lot of little things to soften Cersei a little bit in the show.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, they
until
definitely.
Later. And then they just made her stand at a window for 2.5 seasons.
Made a lot of money.
I mean, honestly, if I was looking at Hetty, I'd be like, you want me to stand here drinking wine? And okay, that's it? Great. Where's my check?
She was great doing it too. She did a great job. One of the interesting notes that I hope we can come back to this in A Feast for Crows, because I think it plays a bit of a more, well, maybe not. We'll see. But maesters are very interesting to me because they have all this knowledge. They have the Citadel. They're clearly not fans of dragons. They're not interested in magic. And there's a line in the prologue where essentially the maester says, "We can heal, but we also can kill."
Isn't that in the prologue?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like, huh. Keep that, like, George didn't just say that in the prologue for no, like, his prologues are stacked with foreshadowing and all these things.
Literal shadows foreshadowing.
Yes. Yeah, right.
So, I mean, I think the maesters are up to something. I think the Citadel is one of the more interesting things that's coming in the Winds of Winter, and Sam being there, and how all that will play out, I'm not sure. But the maesters, I think, in the books are a lot more devious rather than just
I mean, like, anytime you set up like a central place where like knowledge is stored and controlled, like, unless you're a hack writer, like, that is going to be where, I mean, knowledge is power. And so, like, whether that power is being used for good or evil or for purely selfish things, like, that's always going to be a center of power.
For sure.
Yeah. And there is a theory about maesters. Yeah.
Which, I mean, would make sense, right? Because again, subtle changes in the show. The only real, like, kind of crappy person that you're introduced to that's a maester right off the bat is Pycelle.
Yeah, that bag of shit.
Everybody else is kind of like, Aemon's cool. He's just, a cuddly old blind man. And you've got Crescent and all these other ones that are like, they're pretty just like
Maester
Llewyn almost. And it's really just Pycelle that's kind of garbage.
And we actually get a little bit of their I don't want to say like bigotry towards magic, but like their distaste for it whenever Bran is talking about green dreams from Jojen.
Just write it off.
Yeah, and Llewyn's like, Llewyn's like, that's crap. And like he kind of sounds like a dick. And Llewyn
studied a lot too, though, so like he knows a lot about it, and he's still, which I mean, kind of lends credence to the keeping magic hidden, right?
Yeah,
is that he knows.
But also,
all this stuff.
it is just very reminiscent of like the real world and how people are like, oh yes, well, back in the day, the poor peasants thought that this was magical, but we know now that actually it's science. So like, it's also just reminiscent of that. But when you mention Aemon, like I just started thinking about how like the books, in terms of who you meet, the Targaryens actually aren't. I mean, Viserys is just kind of pathetic, but like Dany and Aemon, like. Your actual experience of Targaryens is pretty positive. And it's only the fact that everybody else, like people like Maesters talking about the history, or like when we talk about, what the Targaryens did when they were in charge, we're talking about who's going to be king now. You hear about the Targaryens and, how mad they were and how like incestuous they were and how awful they were. But the ones you've met that you spend a lot of time with are Aemon and Dany, and they're fine.
Aemon's phenomenal. I love Aemon. And
tragic backstory.
Yeah, and him having the talk with Jon, like, it's such a believable moment. Yeah.
Well, later too, Mormont elaborates on that talk to be like, let me give you more context for like him being here.
Yeah. Yeah, the wall is such an interesting setting, especially with all the history there. I mean, we're talking about scrolls and stuff. I mean, it is fairly interesting that there are so many scrolls that Sam finds, and it's kind of a glancing statement, right? But they're there, and I think that him having to take some stuff to the Citadel later, all that, I think it's all going to play in. Like, what are in those ancient scrolls?
Magic.
For sure. Magic,
Also, the ending of the entire book is foreshadowed in the prologue, which is one of the coolest things George has ever done. Under the sea, smoke rises, bubbles, and flames burn green, blue, and black. More Blackwater Bay, foreshadowing. I know. It's pretty cool. Right.
We'll get to it. We're obviously jumping around a lot, but so Sansa, hormonally mental the months before her first period. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that, here, Leanna, I'll pass this to you. It's like, just kidding. I'm kidding. I am the authority on this subject. So just kidding. But yeah, I mean, I think he does a great job, which is why Sansa bothers so many people, is because she's kind of like an annoying teen character. It's like, yeah, exactly. Like she's a spoiled little princess.
Young and naive, and Yeah, that's her main
Like us, the
crime,
reader,
being
like
naive.
as you know, as much as I'm going to contradict myself because I hate Lift as a character for being an annoying child character. Like it's understandable in the sense of like this world, especially where she is so naive and doesn't understand it at all. Which I mean, most of the Starks don't seem to, which is why they all die. But like she doesn't know what's going on, and she's so I want to say dumb, but it's really just naive.
Just
Well,
kid.
even
Like,
I mean, after everything that she's been through, it's kind of like towards the end of Clash of Kings when she's now free of Joffrey, and she's like, "Oh, I'm free," and they're like, "Oh, sweet honey child,
like, what are
why
you
do you think
saying?
that this is actually good news for you?"
Right?
And she's like, "What? No," and you're like, "You've been through so much. Like, did you really think this was good news?"
I
And
mean,
just the same thing with like again Blackwater when she's talking to Cersei, and Cersei's just like, "Let me be real with you. Like he's here so that y'all don't get raped, and he's also here to kill us because we're not getting taken prisoner." She's just like, "Oh,
and then she's seeing what being a queen it really is,
Yeah.
right? I mean, the sacks of cities and making those awful decisions that kind of
It's not
force
a
your hand.
song.
Yeah, and Sir Dantos is a further examination of fantasy tropes as well.
yeah,
Because the way Sansa viewed the world, she would have a prince in shining armor, but it's a drunken clown named Sir Dantos,
Yep.
and her real savior is a scarred dog in the Hound.
yeah."
Well, both of them, because I mean, like Sir Dantos is also like, he's trying to help her, and the fact that
Mhm.
in her mind too, like when she reflects on how all of those true knights stood by and did nothing, and it was this guy who's not even a true knight, and like,
Yep.
she's like, he's being more knightly.
All the knights in their precious honor.
Mhm.
And like Tyrion is a lot more like he behaves towards her the way she always imagined someone as beautiful as Joffrey would, which is
Mhm.
like, oh, he's a kind and chivalrous prince, except he's horrible. Whereas Tyrion shows her chivalry,
Yeah.
and of course, she like sneers at it, but
'Cause
we
he's
fixed that
ugly.
in first law.
Oh my god. Drink.
Bouncing back to the prologue real quick, and then I'll stop mentioning the prologue.
That's fine. It's a good jumping off point.
The morning air was dark with the smoke of burning gods. Oh, what a great opening line. That's
Is
so
it like
good.
is it like a shared universe with RF Kwong?
They foreshadowed book 3 of her series.
Oh my god, you're right. We also got our first mention of Azor High in the prologue. I mean,
Yeah.
that prologue is so good.
I think that we were talking about
It's
that.
only, I
when
mean, it's a
we started
prologue that
reading
like
it.
as like if it was like a pilot, like for a show,
Yeah.
like it like sucks you in.
Yeah.
Because it's so different than in Westeros and like what you're used to seeing like at that point, because all of a Game of Thrones is focused on like the King's Road and King's Landing and Winterfell, and then you get into this and it's just like, oh, here's all these other people on an island in the middle of nowhere talking about some like red priestess and fire gods and prophecies, and you're just like,
I mean, Melisandre comes off the page. Like she
Oh,
is
yeah.
kind of presented to us as like a charlatan and evil, and which tells me immediately George is going to play with that.
yep.
So is she really evil? And in a world where magic isn't supposed to be real and the gods aren't actually
It's
active,
making a
like,
comeback.
yeah, she's like doing things that does presumably seem as if her god is real. But
Or if not a god, she has access to something.
yes, but and then you have to wonder, do the gods rely on the existence of dragons? Because the dragons come back, right? The magic starts coming back. We see that with the Alchemist Guild. Whenever he's saying, we couldn't get our spells to work correctly, but now ever since the comet, we're able to do it faster, which we know the
Mhm.
comet signifies the return of dragons.
Yep.
And then the maesters say all the magic went out with the drag. It's very interesting. So like, do the gods only exist if dragons are around?
But then I mean, our White Walkers also, because like we saw them before dragons were reborn.
yeah.
They were in the prologue of Game of Thrones.
Yeah, and another thing about the White Walkers that's I love, and it's disturbing, is the fact that and maybe this is this actually might be in a Storm of Swords. Craster's Keep was in this book, am I right?
Yeah. Crassus
Okay,
is
yeah.
this. You already know about the sacrifices.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
he calls them
Just so gross. Oh my God.
they say the sons are coming.
Yeah.
Talking about Craster's sons, like
Yeah.
that is so terrifying. Like the sons are coming. It's some of that horror that George likes to write, and gives
Well,
them
I mean-
very foreboding.
Yep.
So I'm gonna bring up a first law again.
Oh my
But I
god.
think
Fourth
The
drink.
things that like why I like things like the Song of Ice and Fire, First Law. Obviously other series as well, but where like it's not that there's no magic, but it's very low magic. And so that when magic does happen,
It's
like it doesn't
impactful.
have to be big magic. It's
Yeah.
very little magic that makes you go, what's that magic?
Because it's
versus
not
like
it's not like a
versus
wizard
like Marvel
walking
that
into a
like just
battle.
like bigger and bigger and bigger. And you're like,
Yeah.
well, this is just absurd. Versus like a little thing where you're like, I mean, just like Melisandre in the prologue, it's a tiny thing. It's not like a big explosive magic thing, but it has such bigger impact because this world is so low magic.
But I mean, I would say it's definitely low magic, and it doesn't focus entirely on the magic itself. But like White Walker is introduced in the prologue, like that's definitely magical. You have a giant magic ice wall that can't be breached that protects the north from like all these things that everyone thinks are BS,
Grumpkins.
basically. Yeah. You've got again another mention in this book again of there's a literal wildling giving his sons as tribute to the walkers, and that's like all you really hear about it. You're just like, what? Because there's so much less of like a thing in the books. They're just kind of like, oh yeah, by the way, these things still exist. Like they're literally creating more of them. And then you have actual dragons. And like once we get to Karth, you get a lot more magic. Again, it's not people like throwing out fireballs.
Well, you also meet Jack and Hagar, who is doing some interesting parlor tricks at the very least.
Do you guys
There's
ever
so much in this book?
There really is.
We'll get to it.
Do you feel like there's a chance Illyrio, being from Bravos, is Jack and Hagar?
I don't think the timing would work.
Well, I feel like that's the kind of thing that like a cheaper universe, you know, Star Wars, where everybody is a secret Skywalker, secret Palpatine, you know, where like it makes the world feel smaller, and like in some connections, some overlap makes it cool and connected. But when everybody is secretly always like connected in somebody else and the relative of, you know what I mean? Like it just condenses everything to something like gimmicky and small.
Yeah.
You know, like not everyone is secretly somebody else.
The only reason I don't think so is because we see Illyrio in a Game of Thrones in the dungeons of King's Landing, like talking about, you know, when Arya like overhears the conversation about what's happening, but then it's like, then he's also with Dany and Viserys.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm talking about Syria Farrell. I'm sorry.
Oh, Syria. Okay.
I you got the name wrong, but I somehow knew you meant Syria.
I wrote it down wrong.
I know because that's a pretty like big theory that Syria was actually Jaqen.
Yeah.
Because like goes from her sword fighter and then dies off screen. Like he's probably not dead. And then Jaqen shows up and is like super impactful to Arya, and then gives her the coin to Bravos. And like the only other Bravosi that you've been introduced to is Syrio Farrell, and you never see him again. It's like,
and also, if Jack and Hagar is a face of man, what was he doing in the dungeons? Because he could clearly just get, he had to be there for a
gets out of everything.
Yeah. They just go, and you know, they're kind of like, I mean, they don't really have free will in a way, right? Like they're always on a mission when they're out changing faces. So if he's not Syrio Farrell, then you have to wonder, why was he in the dungeon?
Yeah.
So I can't believe I called him Illyrio.
That's why I was confused. But no, see,
big fan.
I've read that. I like that theory actually, that it's Syrio, simply because
I like my theory that Jimmy's a fake fan was confirmed tonight.
Certainly.
I mean, the only other thing that I guess to bring Syrio back into Arya's storyline would be her going to Bravos and training with Syrio, and like him being there, right? Like, what else would you really do with Syrio if he gets out of King's Landing alive and then reappears later and it's not Jaqen? But
honestly, I just feel like, you know, it doesn't always have to be that you're introducing somebody who's like secretly somebody else. Like, I think that Syrio, he introduces the concept of Bravos and what the Bravosi are like, and so plants that, so it's not just like, oh, this new world that came out of nowhere. Like, we've already gotten a sense of kind of like somebody who's from there. She's encountered it before. So when we meet Jaqen, then she's like, oh, like I kind of know about this. Like I kind of recognize some of this, because introducing Jaqen is already such a weird thing to introduce, but you now at least like you have like a foothold in like where he's from. It's not just like a completely new concept, a new part of the map.
Yeah.
What is a new concept is the faceless men being a thing, though.
Also, we talk about the narrator of the audiobook. The way that he says Valar Morghulis made me want to die.
I hated it. Bad. When he said it, I was like, no, it's Valar Morghulis. Stop. Like, don't ever say it like that.
Oh, here's what happens. I question myself when I hear Roy say things. I'm like, wait.
I don't question anything I've ever said when I listen
honestly,
to
I don't even. It's not that I question myself. I question what I'm like. What is he trying to say? Because I don't know what's happening right now, and I should know what's happening because I've read this before and I've seen this show. And then I'm like, I try to like write down in my mental paper, sound out what he's saying. I'm like, oh, he's trying to say like Brienne. I honestly didn't know he was trying to say Brienne.
Right.
I was like, huh?
Right.
And then like context clues, I was like, oh, you mean Brienne?
I like what Derry said. Derry's saying that Peter knows how expensive faceless men are. He knows that Ned will be offered the wall. So he knows the dungeon dregs will soon be given to the wall also. So maybe it's possible that Peter would have put Jaqen into the dungeons. This is a way of getting around him being Serial Pharrell and being in the dungeons. I mean, maybe. I could see it. I don't think Peter's plan ever entailed Ned dying, actually. I really don't.
No, that was kind of a wrench in everyone's
No one's
plans.
plan entailed Ned dying. Everyone was like, what the?
Everyone was like, get him out of here. We'll send him to the wall. We'll brainwash Sansa, make her a puppet queen. Oh, you cut his head off.
I mean, like, even like the most sinister characters, like Cersei and Tywin and Tyrion are like,
I just love the imagery of Varys running across and being, what are you doing? You know, like, what? Because Varys never plays his hand. And he plays his hand. He's like, what in the fuck?
Because that does not protect the realm.
Danger, mayday.
Yeah.
If you're there to protect the realm, you don't just decapitate the man that you were going to send to the wall. Like,
yeah.
Well, because like also it's not just about Ned. Like you know that like the Starks are gonna have to like
have war.
Go to war. Like that's gonna happen. You've just brought that upon yourself when you didn't have to.
Which is a great scene that we get with Tyrion, right? Talking about when he comes back to King's Landing. And he's just like, yeah, you guys kind of killed all those talks when you literally cut his head off. Everything's screwed now. Congratulations. And they have Jaime. Like, not good.
And when he's like, okay, we still have Sansa and Arya. Like, we still have Sansa. He's like, okay, that's going to be good enough.
Yeah, it's going to have to do. Oh, man.
It's like 2 sisters? Well, we have Sansa. He's like,
yeah.
What?
It's also interesting that all the way through this book, like everyone either thinks Arya's missing, she's safe at the castle, or she's dead, and then she's really just roaming through Harrenhal. And Arya's story, I will tell you this: I think that I don't know what's wrong with me, but I never really, I wouldn't say I didn't feel empathy for Arya. Things. Well, certainly, but like this read through, I am connecting with Arya way more, and she's so young. Lami's death, Lami's death is brutal. The march to Harrenhal is, I mean,
I thought you said mommy's death, and I was like, what?
Mommy.
Well, it's interesting how much more leeway people give Arya than Sansa, because Arya does a lot of dumb things because she's a kid. She's young also.
She's brash,
I think it's because like Sansa's a little bit older. We're like, well, she's a grown woman, especially by the standards of this world. Whereas Arya, I guess people are like, she really is a little kid. So when she like, you know, it starts like bragging about, you know, having a sword, and you're like, be quiet. Because she does just as dumb as Sansa when she just like says things not realizing what a bad idea it is to say that.
I think it's because of the dynamic of the character, because Sansa is really just that spoiled princess that like is so naive to the world around her, and all of her, like, she is kind of shitty to Arya and then gets her own wolf killed, and then it's like she still wants to marry Joffrey and be a princess, and it's like she keeps wanting to do that. Like Arya acts out and lashes out, but like you kind of root for her because it's like she's defending, you know.
But like in their own ways, they're both survivors in their given context. Because Sansa, like going around with a sword, that wouldn't help her where she is, and like Arya being like diminutive wouldn't help where she is. But they're both like adapting, like to be a survivor in their given.
Yeah,
like,
she's a wolf, man.
Paradigm.
Yeah, and
by the way, I love when her and Gendry, which I think they did word for word, when they're talking and he realizes who she is. Or like, but like right after he tells her to pull her cock out, it's like, pull your cock out and take a piss. And then he realizes who she is. He's like, oh my God, I'm sorry, princess. Such a good scene.
I also really enjoy the fact that Arya is also a bit, I wouldn't even say foreshadowing, but kind of a revelation on who Lyanna Stark was as a person, because we're reminded multiple times in the first book that Ned believes her to be just like his sister Lyanna. So with this context and what we think we know about Rhaegar and Lyanna at this point doesn't really add up if Lyanna was like Arya. Like I don't see her being a damsel in distress. That's never been Arya, because and then I can exactly right. So like that's kind of like a really cool parallel that he draws between those two characters, and through an Arya POV, we get some of the first foreshadowing of Red Wedding when Roose Bolton gets a letter from his new Frey wife, and he burns it. We don't know what it says, right? And then he goes to hunt wolves.
Yep.
I forgot that line when he's like, I have to go
so
hunt the
good.
wolves. I can't they're keeping me up at night. Oh, you bastard, Roos.
So just for my own, because they changed that completely for the show, right? Because
Yes.
they put Tywin there, which is phenomenal. I loved that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I
the
was
interactions between him and Arya, like
rereading
for
it,
the
I was actually
show.
looking for that, and I was like, oh yeah, they don't do that in the book. I was kind of hoping that they did, because I love those scenes between them. But
It was one of the times that the change was actually a good idea for the show.
Yeah, I would actually agree with that. I think it's pretty, now you look back, right? It's pretty obvious what George was setting up here with it being Roose. Like I see why he did Roose, but we didn't really lose much from it switching to Charles Dance or Tywin or whatever. So, and I do
Charles Dance is Tywin and Tywin is Charles Dance.
Charles Dance is the GOAT.
Yeah.
Absolute GOAT. Yeah, but Arya's story just really bleak, man. And
really, also, I mean, like reading the books, like I remember just thinking, like as they went on, that I mean, well, Bran stuff is also bizarre, but just thinking that Arya's plotline gets the most bizarre and the most where like I don't know where that's going or what, like I have no point of reference, no other story to be like, well, this is kind of following the trajectory of, or oh, this is an interesting subversion of the trajectory. I'm just like, I don't know what is happening with that at all.
Well, you know, think about like kids going on a magical journey and some wizard takes them away and gives them a special coin and they go and it's like, you know, it's Harry Potter walking to Hogwarts and through the wall to Hogwarts, but instead of that, she's being trained as a faceless man.
I guess I meant so like once like that, yeah, like I mean, get what we get in this book. Then once she gets there and like her training begins, I just remember every time I got to an Arya chapter, I was like, I don't know what's gonna happen here.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you can say that about Bran too, though, because especially like in this book, like meeting Jojen and Mira and just talking about the green dreams, and Jojen immediately just being like, I know exactly what you're seeing because I see it too. And Bran's just like, no, this is stupid. Like, this is all a dream. This is all fake. And he's just like, Bran, listen to me. This is what's happening. And you start to see those like visions of like the water crashing on Winterfell and all the stuff that like he doesn't understand yet. And then
we really started thinking about him being a warg for the first time, like it being real.
Because it hasn't really happened yet, as far as like, has it?
No, it's visions, right? So we don't know if it's true or not. And it's one of those things where you can use that as like a means to further the story and what he's feeling inside, But George is straight up telling us with Jojen, like, nah, fam, it's real.
Yep.
Like shit's getting weird in Westeros. And Bran's chapter.
Well, I think the fact that, I mean, as you said, the prologue, like being so strong, like the prologue, just like the prologue in Game of Thrones sets up that every time people talk about White Walkers, that this is not a joke, that they're making fun of it, but you've seen in the prologue that they're for real. And so similarly here with this prologue, we saw what Melisandre could do. We know that weird stuff is possible. Yeah. So then every time things are happening and there's doubt thrown out by other characters, like, oh, that's not real. Or like, you might think that's what's going on, but you saw there's weird shit going on. So you're like, no, I think it's real.
Yeah, and it's also starting to take over the townsfolk and such, because the comet is such a big thing, and people are, what's it mean to different cultures, which is also another really great way of like building out your world without telling me shit. You know, oh, you see the comet, it means this and that. And so even that is kind of a signal, and you can feel there's like some, you know, there's almost like a buzz around Flea Bottom and Winterfell and all these places. And our main characters who are a little higher born think it's all silly, you know, and they're going to be
too rich to care.
They will each in turn look at the comment and be like, well, I mean, is it kind of low key, like a personal sign?
Yeah. Like I'm going to win the war. Yeah. One thing,
pompous, arrogant, rich people
who think the whole world is
the comet is for me.
I mean, man, you can draw some parallels to our world with that shit. One thing I want to bring up about Bran that I really loved, and I think it could be the beginnings, maybe, of Bran having a higher purpose, even past being just like the three-eyed raven or crow or whatever. Yeah,
well, it's to win the Game of Thrones.
I think
he has the best story.
Lumen, who I love, by the way, is. The early chapters with him and Bran, they fill out the rest of the North and all the vassals. That's how we get introduced to the Karstarks, Manderleys, and all this stuff. And it's because Lewin is teaching Bran how to be the leader of the house. And it shows like the North is super huge. Like it's massive, way bigger than I thought from Game of Thrones. And it establishes all the houses and the reputations in the politics, while also showing us that Bran has like a natural affinity for solving problems because he's catching on very quickly, and Lewin's training him. So that's a pretty good catalyst, I think, for the future of maybe what will happen with Bran. And then at the end of the book, he basically says something about like talking about the king sitting in their crypts, and even though it's the Winterfell's been crippled, like it's still there, it's still alive, and so is he. And it's like interesting. He mentioned the king's in the crypt.
And being crippled.
It's really
Bran the Broken.
Bran.
What's you also get some of the like Bear Island and some of the rest of that from Jorah, because he's reminiscing kind of about like his whole tragic backstory. But, I mean, you get a lot of that fleshed out as well, just from his POV, which I don't remember. I think they kind of cut from the show.
Going back to like how good George R. R. Martin is at giving you information without giving you information, like just having some central points of knowledge that like everybody's going to have an opinion on. And so then you don't have to say that these people tend towards this worldview. You can just show them reacting to a thing that everybody's reacting to, like the comet, or like news of Robert's death,
is messed up
or whatever. I know, but just giving them the opportunity to react to something that you already know about, so you don't need to know about this thing, but seeing how different people in different parts of the world react to a thing, how they interpret it, or what they have to say about it when it comes up, shows you what you need to know about them as characters or that part of the world.
Yeah, for sure.
Winterfell is the crypts, not the castle. Yeah, Derry, that's a good point. I was thinking about when Bran was in the crypts, and in the subsequent chapter, or a couple chapters ahead, Jon and Ingrid talk about Bael the Bard, and Bael the Bard had scaled the wall, went down the King's Road, acted as if he was a bard and tricked everyone, and Lord Stark asked Bael what he wanted as a reward because he was so impressed with his skills. He requested only the most beautiful flower blooming in Winterfell's gardens, the blue winter roses. And in the same book, Dany sees a blue rose at the wall of ice.
Yup.
Dude. Goat. It's absolutely goated. You kidding?
This is why he hasn't written Winds of Winter yet, because he got 5 books in and was like, I created so much shit that I got confused.
And this is also one of those things, like, people point out their authors, this person writes a book a year, and it's like, they're not doing this. Like it's just true. They're just not doing it like this. And some people look at this and they say,
that's what I would always say about Name of the Wind when people would talk about like, why can't he be more like Brandon Sanderson? And I'm like, because quality over quantity.
Well, it's just totally different approach to telling your story, right? Like, and both are valid and fine, and people can like whichever one they want. And some people look at this stuff and they say, I don't care about Bael the Bard, I just want to know what happens. But for me, this is the stuff that I love. Like,
it's also the kind of stuff that, like, even if you're not sitting there puzzling things together, it's stuff like that subconsciously, because it's kind of generally around. There's just subconsciously this sense of there's just like layers to this world, and it makes it feel real.
Yeah.
I think we talked about this last time.
Wow.
About Mance being in Winterfell. I think we talked about that last live stream. Yeah,
and that kind of goes with Bael the Bard. Which draws some really interesting parallels to another person who really liked to sing named Rhaegar, but I do not believe Mance is Rhaegar. I used to, but I do not anymore. I don't think Rhaegar can be alive for the story to work.
Kind of silly.
Yeah, it can't work. And Leanna, you actually said something very I like that. If everything's connected, it makes the world smaller. That's actually a really good point.
But also some of it's just like not believable.
Yeah, Rhaegar has to be dead, because it's the kickstart to the series, and it's Prince Charming losing the battle for the girl. He has to be dead. I used to really like it, because if you actually look at the way Mance is described in the books, it's like very similar to Rhaegar. Like there's a lot.
Rhaegar went out in the woods and just got grizzly.
Yeah, and like would he look different? George does put that across that people don't know what people look like. They only hear the names and the legends. So I think misidentity is a real thing in this world.
Well, I think it also, it's the kind of thing where you throw out enough things where even if that's not the plan, where sometimes someone is secretly somebody, but most of the time probably not. And so you're always just going to be keyed into well, is this one? Is this one? Is this one? Is this one? And if everybody is, well, that's honestly, frankly, boring. So but sometimes it is. And so then always being just on alert for oh, does he look like that? Could it be that? But probably not.
So Robert is charming. I mean, Robert is a charmer in my book, but
Jimmy prefers blondes.
Yeah, that's just what it is in bards.
So let's jump back. So some minor things that again changes. Davos has 7 kids in the book.
Dude's fertile.
He's got 1 in the show and he dies.
Yeah.
I think he loses a couple of kids, right? At Blackwater. Pretty sure.
Yeah.
Even though, and also, I love the actor they chose for him. And I thought he got the vibe right, but he's actually described as looking quite different from.
Several of them are. You have Jorah, who's handsome as hell on the show, and he's supposed to be this creepy old man that wants a 13-year-old.
Master
Peter
simp.
Dinklage.
Little sus.
Master simp. Davos is the true good guy, man. He really is. We hear that he might have been unfaithful back in his day, but he seems like a guy that's trying to turn good and do the right thing. And
well, I love that also Davos, instead of again telling us that Stannis is gruff, but also he is his more there's a reason people are loyal to him. Instead of telling you all that, just having Davos, his experience,
his personal connection,
that tells you a lot about Stannis without you actually being told about Stannis.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And here's a question about Stannis while we mentioned Stannis, and this is something I hadn't known, but I've seen people talk about this, and I don't know what the justification for this is. But some people believe that Stannis is representation of autism, that he's on the spectrum. Alan mentioned this. Noel's in the chat. Noel also mentioned this. And then the more I looked into it, a lot of people feel like that is true.
Is it maybe because he latches onto things and doesn't quite understand that he can't just have it the way that he believes it should be?
Yeah, that in his kind of yes or no attitude. I don't know too much about it, so I don't.
It would make sense for from talking with Alan.
We're talking about Stannis. This whole time I was thinking Davos, and I was like, I don't get it. How is Davos?
No, he just missing
something. I'm with you now, and I see it.
Definitely hearing Alan say that makes sense, because if you know Alan, he says that he can't let things go, and he hates certain people abusing power, and you can see a lot of that in Stannis of he's the rightful king. Everyone should just fall in line and do that. And he can't comprehend he can't comprehend the people not falling in line with that. So I could definitely see some of where that's coming from for sure.
But so then I guess also the question is even if the result of how he's represented is that it could very easily be interpreted that way, do we think George meant it to be interpreted that way?
Yeah, hard to say. I feel like it wasn't as prevalent when he wrote these, but George is also a pretty thoughtful guy. Mm-hmm. I would love to ask him that question. Actually, that'd be one of my, if I ever had
accidental representation or intentional representation.
Yeah, it makes you wonder. Now, people say Stannis is very cut and dry, and it's true. But if you look at Davos, Davos is a very good example of instead of beheading him, maybe Davos is one of the exceptions.
Stannis is also kind of the less likable further extension of the type of thing that Ned is. He's just one step further, because Ned is very this is the right way to do it, this is the wrong way to do it, and we do only what is right. And so then Stannis is even further and is no negotiating, and he's not even pleasant about it.
And he's cold to his daughter, he's cold to his wife.
So Ned was soft and would still show affection and have a softer way of expressing himself, but his at his core he's no, what there is right and there is wrong, and I'm not bending on that. But he would say it in a way that was trying to be nicer and convince you or soften the blow, whereas Stannis is the same in the core as Ned is, but he's not going to soften it. He's gonna be this is right, this is wrong, don't care.
Yeah, it's Ned could be soft as snow or as chill as ice. It depended on the situation, and he would vary it depending. I think Catelyn actually talks about that quite a few times. the distinction between the two and how he could switch and how she, like, whenever his eyes went to ice, she knew like he meant business. And Stannis does not have that, at least so far.
Down to business.
I love Alan. What a guy. What a guy. My
I would
wife
just like you to
loves-
know that song was not written by Alan, and
What?
that song was. Oh,
I'm still amazed Disney hasn't come after his channel.
Oh, it's coming. And my wife's favorite movie is Mulan. So every time I watch Alan's video, she loves it. She's like, "Oh, is he gonna do the thing?" I'm like, "Yeah, he's gonna."
Yes, of course he is.
He's doing the thing.
So jumping back to because we haven't talked too much about Tyrion yet. When he gets back
Talk
to
about
King's
Tyrion.
Landing and he just like dresses down Janos Slint,
That piece of
it's
shit.
so good.
Oh, it's
And he
so.
just like gets him drunk off his ass, and he just like thinks that he's praising him, and he's just talking shit the whole time. He's just like, "Oh, you'll enjoy the wall." He's just like, "What? I have friends at court, you little imp bastard." He's just like, "Keep talking, it's fine."
And he doesn't want to call him Lord. I mean, Janos Slint is a grade A douche.
Oh yeah, he's terrible.
knowing what a big fan of these books Joe Abercrombie is.
Get the guy poured a drink.
I cannot, like, the whole time I was reading Clash of Kings, Tyrion's plotline is so reminiscent of Glocta's plotline in Before They Are Hanged, that like he shows up and is taking charge of the situation, taking charge of defense of the city, trying to figure out who's up to what, and questioning everybody and like planting little schemes to try to figure that out. He himself is physically like not able to do things, but he's smart, so he can try to follow that up and suss that out while also preparing for war. I was like, honestly, like I mean, I love Abercrombie, and I'm not saying he's plagiarizing it, but I was like, is Before They Are Hanged your version of Clash of Kings?
I mean, maybe, right? And you know,
there's a lot of that in it.
both are vilified and hated for the position they're in, for the status that they hold, being crippled.
And also for their physical, like,
yes, deformities. Yep.
Yeah.
A cool thing that I wrote down here is that through Catelyn, we
You're
hear
not
that-
allowed to think that what you wrote down is cool.
Oh, well, I thought what George wrote down was cool, and in turn, I thought it would be cool for me to write about his coolness. Catelyn, we talks about Harrenhal's past and the history of it, and that it's cursed. And the very next chapter, Tyrion chapter, where he sends Janos Slint to the wall, who is the holder of Harrenhal at the time, therefore reaffirming the fact that it could be cursed. It's interesting. Like, anybody that holds Harrenhal has bad luck, right? And the next chapter, Janos Slint loses Harrenhal, gets sent to the wall. It's a nice little thing. And also Harrenhal is like one of my favorite like settings.
It's so
and
cool.
war pieces. It's so good. And then Littlefinger gets it later, but Littlefinger through Tyrion's eyes becomes way more interesting to me because he respects Littlefinger's scheming, but at multiple points he actually admits that he fears Littlefinger. Like, not just thinks he's cunning and like sly, but he's like, I'm like legitimately worried about this guy and I want to cut him down. I want to get rid of him. He thinks about killing him at one point, but he just keeps getting distracted and distracted and distracted. And I think it's an indication of how important Littlefinger will be down the line. I really
Definitely.
do.
That's why I love for what the show did with his character and Varys is actually getting to see so much of their scheming and their conversations that you just don't see in the books at all, unless it's through someone else's eyes because they're not POVs, which is very unfortunate.
And again, excellent casting for both of them.
Of
Certainly.
course. I love Pattyr's casting.
God damn it. What do you guys think about Cersei and Tyrion's relationship?
It's toxic.
It's so rough to read at some points when Tyrion's like genuinely trying to bridge the gap. And
well, I mean, the saddest is when she shows him physical affection and he's like, oh, okay, she's up to something.
Oh, yeah.
And
like,
she is.
So sad
She
that like
is.
that's all it takes for you to know she's up to something. He never questions it. Never enters his mind that like, oh, this is genuine affection. It's like,
and you see Tyrion, it bothers Tyrion. Like, it runs deep. How it's, I don't even want to say it's a hatred. It's he feels like it's a betrayal. Like, we're supposed to be family. That's what Dad teaches. And
because they don't consider him family. He's like an embarrassment on their name.
well, I think it also like having, because you really don't see much of Jaime at all, even though he's my favorite character. Like, you don't see him until way later in the series. And I think that like having seen so much of Tyrion and Cersei, it makes it so much sweeter. Because by itself, like Jaime and Tyrion, like it's a pretty good relationship. But it's the fact that you're juxtaposing it in your mind with Tyrion's relationship with Cersei that you're like, how precious, how sweet, how wonderful. He actually loves his brother.
Because you don't get a lot of, because in the books, it's like Whispering Wood happens and Jaime's captured. And then you learn that he's captured. And then like you get the scene with him and Cat
fantastic conversation.
Instead of him and Rob, because Rob's not there. But like,
if it happened with Rob, we wouldn't have seen it because they're not either of them is a POV.
But again, like that's another change that I liked, like having Rob sort of confront Jaime. But Cat doing it with Brienne there was outstanding. But I mean, the brother sister dynamic of like, really the only time you see Cersei like actually get upset is when Tyrion's trying to like ship her kids away, and you see her actually kind of like break down.
Well, I love that too. That moment when Tyrion is like just thinking to himself because Joffrey's being Joffrey, and he's like, does she really not like? Is she really blind to what Joffrey is, or does she know and not care? Where he's just like wondering to himself, and not that it really matters, but in terms of how she behaves, like ultimately, like it does. You don't need to know because how she behaves, it will be no different regardless. But when he's just like, does she really not see it, or does she see it and she doesn't care?
It also kind of breaks his heart that like she actually believes that he's enough of a monster that he just like wants the worst for her children. And
well, it's interesting because it's also like the realization also on some level that you're like, well, she thinks that because she's projecting, because that proves to me that is what she thinks, that like that's what she would do.
Yeah, and I think it's also evident, and it lays the groundwork. And I see this all the time, and I think it's from just show watchers mainly. They say, "Oh, Cersei's just so smart and devious," and she's not. She's not Tywin. She wants to be Tywin, but she
tells her that.
Yeah, she's a dunce,
and she's like cocky. That's the biggest downfall. Like she doesn't have the humility to wonder if she might be wrong. She's like, I'm smarter than all of y'all, and I would be running the world if I had a penis. And you're like, well.
And I think she has anxiety, and I think a lot of that probably comes from the trauma of Robert, and on top of that, probably trying to hide her and Jaime's relationship from her father. I think that probably really impacts her as a character. And one of the best pieces of the whole like dynamic between her and Tyrion is when Tyrion out schemes her and finds out Pycelle's leaking information, and then I hate Pycelle, and we find out that he let the gates open. And all this stuff whenever Ares was on the throne. Like we get so much good stuff from their interactions that go much further than just, brother and sister hating each other.
Well, I mean, and we get our first glimpse of Jaime, how he really feels about what he did and the reputation he has for it, which like later gets much more developed. But like we get our first taste of like Jaime, like he can be all glib and Jaime, but he like, you can like, even in that little conversation, you can see how much it irks him what people say about him. He's like, he's very above it all and very easy and very glib, and he'll just like be like, fuck you. But when it comes to that, he's like,
he hears Kingslayer and he's just like,
I actually have this in big, but I said the beginning of Jaime's arc. This is actually the beginning, because we finally hear his side of the story when he's talking. And like you said, the Catelyn conversation is A+. We get all the backstories of Mad King's betrayal, and we get the inkling that Jaime, while he has done bad things, is vilified for some of the wrong reasons, and he didn't ignore the king's madness. And Gerald Hightower, who everyone says is such an honorable, amazing knight, has a couple pages that he stood there and he said, "We are not to judge the king. We are here to protect him." And this is a part where Ned was too cold steel. Ned hated Jaime for that. But he saw him burn your brother and your father. You know what I mean? Like Jaime, it's weird that somehow George can make him sympathetic, but he did.
It's wild. But also even as terrible as what he did, shoving a child out of a window, he's straight up with Cat about it. He's like, what he does, I would do anything to protect my family. So he was like, I pushed him out the window. I hope that he would have died. He didn't. That sucks, but
so I feel like what he does by first showing us Ned and where like most, or maybe not most now at this point, but like back in the day, the way fantasies were written, doing things honor for honor's sake is always the right answer, and it leads to good things, and that's what you're supposed to do. And then doing the dishonorable thing is what the villains do. And by showing us Ned's arc, where he's the honorable one and he's the one that does what's right, and where did that get? Not just him, not just like, well, I got you killed. It got the whole of like the continent at war and your
Mhm.
children in danger. And it was just a bad idea all around versus Jaime, who does the dishonorable thing, but
And
it's probably the
save.
smart thing and
Prevent
saves
war.
people by doing it. And just like establishing that like honor for honor's sake is not a good thing.
Dude, that's a good point. That's a great parallel to draw from those two. I'd never thought of that, but you're right.
Well, Jaime's my favorite character. So I thought about Jaime a lot.
I mean, we need to finish it, but like Jaime has the potential to be like possibly my favorite arc in like fiction. Like I love Jaime.
Him and Shivers.
Shivers, my boy.
Unless
Well,
George. does
the
what
jury's
show
still out.
does.
The jury's still out. We don't know. Well,
In the show, they shafted it.
I'm just gonna let you guys know. If it goes circular, I have no issues with it. I actually don't mind. I don't
If
see
they
that
build
happen.
him up that much, though, to that degree of like he's actually willing to go and fight whites at Winterfell, and then he's like, I gotta go back to Cersei.
Well, his entire arc is going to be different in the books as Tyrion's is as well because of the conversation they had before Tyrion flees King's Landing, where they changed one sentence in the show. That whole sentence matters so much for where they end up post A Storm of Swords, and we'll get to that, whenever we read it or whatever. But I think it's going to be much different. But I don't necessarily think it's impossible that it could be a circular arc. I definitely don't. And as an Abercrombie fan, I like circular arcs. So as long as they're done proper. So
Last Argument of Kings still pissed me off.
yeah. We talked about the Lannisters when I just wanted to mark that Joffrey at his name day, when he makes fun of Tommen, makes me so mad.
Because Joffrey's such a little asshole.
His chubby little legs were pumping. That's what it said about Tom. I was like, that is adorable, dude.
Well, also just everything about Tommen all the time. Just like I just honestly picture in the Disney animated how little Michael looks and how little Michael is, and he's like, I want to fight pirates too, and you're like, oh, you're so cute.
I love, and Marcella's cheering him on, and you're like, oh, look at this. Like, this is a good family. And then you got Joffrey, and he's just a dick. He's such a dick.
Tommen just wants to joust, man. He
Yeah,
just wants to have some fun.
And he says, he says he doesn't want to let Tommen joust, saying that, and says following his mother's commands are for kids. And Tommen just, Marcella looks at Joffrey.
We are kids.
We are kids. And
yeah, doofus.
And it kind of like makes you want, it's like, man, was Joffrey like just born evil?
Pretty much.
Because Robert didn't seem like he interacted with the other two kids, right? So maybe it just impacts kids differently. I don't know. But like that, we are kids. I think that was very on purpose to kind of remind you that, hey, Joffrey's like 13.
Well, how old are Tommen and Marcella?
Tommen's like 5. He's young.
Then, I mean, maybe it's just showing just how, I don't know, because Joffrey's been pampered for longer, and he's been kind of told that the sun shines on his ass longer than the other kids have. So maybe he just, it went straight to his head.
Yeah.
But
I mean, the thing with Joffrey is it's not just being selfish. It's not just being, thinking like the sun rises and sets for you. He takes pleasure from pain. Yeah. And that doesn't come from being pampered.
Yeah, there's a screw loose there for sure. And he didn't get much nurture. So
where he got over nurtured.
Yeah,
maybe Robert wasn't a good father because he's not his father.
Wait, what?
What?
Excuse
me? Oh, you subscribed to that philosophy? You've been listening to gossip?
As I drink my, what is this called? Lagavulin.
I just honestly, you're such, like, I cannot drink Lagavulin.
Yeah.
I'm struggling. I'm eating coal over here. It's rough.
I'd forgotten about that because it's definitely not on the show that he does that.
It's rough. When we were talking about Tyrion and like him prepping for plans, one of my favorite moments of that is whenever he's talking to Varys on the wall of King's Landing, and he says, "I am all that stands between people who hate me, hate the little monkey demon and Stannis. I'm the only person that stands between them and Stannis." And I think that this is again going to be the case down the road. This is kind of like I guess a prediction or something, but I feel like Tyrion at another point is going to stand between a foe and King's Landing, and next time he's not going to defend them. Whether that's Dany burning the city or whether it's something else. I think
The
that
White Walkers.
it could even be that. Like, I really think Tyrion's going to come for vengeance.
Will Tyrion's plan be to hide in the crypts?
No, absolutely not.
Really
And he also talks to Cersei, and he says, "I don't." Whenever the whore is captured and everything, he says, it'll like have ashes in your mouth. He's like, I will hurt you. And some people think him like the whole Joffrey thing, but we have to remember, like, Joffrey wasn't killed by Tyrion, so we haven't yet seen that comeuppance that he promises Cersei, which is why I think his exact words are, "Whenever you think that you're hidden away and you're safe, I will, like, it'll burn like ashes in your mouth," or something.
He said,
like
"I will hurt you for this. I don't know how yet, but give me time. A day will come when you think yourself safe and happy, and suddenly your joy will turn to ashes in your mouth, and you'll know the debt is paid."
Yes, and
So
my prediction is that she will flee to Casterly Rock, and he will burn Casterly Rock. I think that'll happen.
But it's a rock.
Shit, he's right. Also, there's wildfire in the dragon pit, folks.
Yeah.
We get that foreshadowing here.
So, I mean, because Tyrion and Dany still, I mean, this book 6, I guess, they still haven't met.
8.
So, I mean, it'll likely be that he...
Well, we know that as soon as Tyrion meets Dany, he becomes stupid, so I don't look forward to that.
And by stupid, you mean evil, and the show didn't want to make Peter Dinklage a bad guy. That's exactly what happened. Which is why that's why they cut the line with Jaime and Tyrion, I think. I think that's why they did. They were like, we cannot take Tyrion down a bad guy role. The fact that Tyrion admits, he says to Jaime, I did kill Joffrey. And in the show, he doesn't. That is such a huge change. It's such a big change. And it really actually spoils Jaime and Tyrion's reunion in a lot of ways, too. Got rid of like a huge pillar of their conflict. Just, oh well.
I mean, whether or not Tyrion outright kills Cersei at some point, though, it's like she's kind of setting herself up to fail, because I think Noelle said it earlier.
The promise for revenge isn't in her dying; it's in her living to see some kind of
her entire family die. Yeah, but like Noelle said it earlier, if Cersei had any sense, she would have put Joffrey in his place a long time ago, which is true, because she just lets that shit run wild.
She sure does.
And like she has no.
Which is why I think that's why Tyrion is like, does she really not see it? Like,
and she won't even defend Tyrion at all, even from people in the council talking down to him. It's
right.
Like,
but I mean, like,
defend.
He doesn't expect her to defend him. But like, Joffrey is like bad for the country, and honestly bad for Cersei, because he puts her in danger by being stupid. And you're like, do you really not see it?
Yeah. They got rid of the admission about Tysha causing Tyrion's pain. That admission was screwed. Yeah, and that's also
because they changed it a little bit. Right?
Yeah, the Tysha story is different.
Yeah, because the show made it strictly that he got played, and then like the knights trained her basically in front of him, and then that was it. There's like more to it than that.
Yeah.
All right, where are we going next? Let's talk about Theon.
Oh,
we haven't mentioned Theon yet.
Dude, he's a textbook narcissist.
But also, what a great introduction to Asha.
He's the worst.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends on your definition.
That's what you're into.
Great.
I mean, it's another example of like a worse author would just tell us a bunch of things about how tricksy and badass she is. But just the fact that she does that to Theon, that tells you everything you need to know about what she's capable of and who she is and what the Iron Islands are like.
It tells you a lot about him, because she says it straight up. It's just like, I wanted to see what kind of man you were, and now I know.
Yeah, and he can't handle that. And that's something that will continue to happen with Theon. He is unable to face the decisions that he makes and see.
Also, every time they talked about Reek, I was like, but he's
right. It's
different.
So what about the part where Theon climaxes when thinking of himself during sex?
I know you like that.
Dude, when I read that, I read it twice. I was like, excuse me? And then I listened to Roy say it because it was creepy and I thought it was funny. But he does this like multiple times where like it's a textbook like sociopathic, narcissistic. He's
so obsessed with himself.
And and
he shows up the pike and he's just like, I'm gonna rule this place one day. And it's like, bro, you've been gone for 10 years. Like, you don't mean shit here.
Dude, when Balon tells me he dresses like a whore, I laugh so
But that moment when he's telling Asha, which he doesn't know is Asha, why, because she's like, well, aren't there brothers, of
That's so
that
good.
could also inherit? And he's like, well, he's been away, so they
Yeah,
wouldn't. And she's
right?
like, he's like, well, I've been away, but
He's
no,
like,
that's different.
Victorian doesn't want the throne, and he's off playing games out on his boat, and Euron's crazy, and like, it's like I'm next in line, and then his dad's just like, yeah, she's actually Ironborn and like doing everything that I'm asking, and you're just this little bitch in a costume. But, like, he's like, He's like, what did you pay for that? Like the iron price or gold? He's just like,
Gold. And he keeps
just, like,
calling him a
rips it
Stark.
off of him. So
Oh,
good.
it's so good. And he doesn't understand when he takes Winterfell and he's putting people down and he's sacked and he's murdering people. He legit can't comprehend that people are mad at him that he grew up
Right?
with. He's like, what did you expect me to do,
He's
man?
like,
I
I've
had to
taken
throw him down the
Winterfell. They're
well."
just like, fuck you.
Yeah,
He's just like, what?
And he actually has that internal thought where he says, I saved like Bran's life with an arrow. Am I gonna have to take it as well? And he feels justified in that. And you're just like,
Yeah.
God, Theon is such a sack of garbage.
Yeah.
Well, it's the fact that, I mean, it's also quite tragic because you're like, I mean, it's sort of like the Joffrey thing where like you were born a little off, but like the fact that even if he was, a smarter or nicer person, he isn't one of the North. Like that's not his
Yeah,
people.
he's
And
also
also
not
the
a
Iron
home.
Islands would disown him even if he was, the type of
Yeah.
person that was savvy and could figure out a situation. They would still reject him. So he is like landless. He is houseless. He is
It's
like in
absolutely
limbo.
tragic, but then it's like at a certain point you got to pick. Like I would say he chooses wrong, but it's like he tries to just make this triumphant comeback to his family, but his family didn't care about him to begin with. Like they let him get taken, and they did not welcome him with open arms. And seeing the kind of person that he was, like you get to experience that with him as like I've made a huge mistake.
Yeah.
Because he starts to realize that, and it is sad. But at the same time, you're just like, God, this guy sucks so much.
And he has those dreams in Winterfell. And I love how George uses dreams, but he uses dreams with Theon and he's surrounded by dead people.
Mhm.
And Robb comes in with Grey Wind, and they're all stabbed up. And it really bothers him. So then he like calls in the girl and like has sex with her until he falls asleep or some madness, because he's a Chad. But
As one does.
yeah, what can you do? Running Winterfell is not easy, folks. But I love that, and like you're seeing him process the grief, and it's like, to give Theon just a slight bit of credit, and by credit I mean an excuse. He's like 16. So he is young. He has, and like Lyanna
John
said,
is 14.
so true. Yeah. I mean, he definitely did not have a real upbringing. I mean, it's hard. And obviously,
Well, I mean, I think, this is also so like, what I was saying. So like Ned and Jaime, interesting counterpoints. You have John and Theon. They were both displaced. Neither of them has like a place. Neither of them has a house. Neither of them could really claim their families because of the different reasons. But how John reacts to that situation versus how Theon reacts to that situation is very different.
Yeah. Do you feel like the Miller's wife kids are his?
Or whose?
Or Theon's? Because he says the Miller's wife, he said, oh, I've laid with her a time or two. And if you look at how old they were, which are Bran and Rickon's age,
young,
it could line up. And he says, I lay with her a time or two. I don't think we'll ever get any confirmation of that, but I like to think that it
could be, but like I don't think you'll get payoff unless Theon realizes.
Wait a minute. Isn't Bran 8 years old? Theon is 16. He'd have to be 8 years old when he.
How here? Let's look. Actually, I need
that math doesn't check out.
Well, you might be right. Let's see Theon's age in Clash of Kings. Oh, he's 19.
Okay.
So. And wait, how old is Bran? Is Bran 8? Is Bran 8?
Yeah, Bran is 8.
Bran is 8 for like the entire series.
He's Benjamin Button. He just doesn't age though.
But yeah, even if he's 19, Bran is 8. So if this kid is Bran's age, he'd have to be 11.
I thought they were younger.
Let's see.
I don't know. I thought they were younger, but either way, it's like if that was, he would never know, right?
Yeah, and we will never find out.
It doesn't matter.
So actually, to be fair, I think he was 9. Actually, if Bran was 9, so I think that you're actually right, Leanna. I don't think it could. One of them maybe could have been Theon's kid, and I don't think it's necessarily important. It's definitely fun headcanon to make it more tragic, right? But like these are one of those things that like George never has to answer ever.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's just fun to think about. Yeah, it looks like people are saying 19. Arya was 8. I thought Bran was 6. I think Bran is a little older than 6.
I think Bran might be 8 at like the end of the like a Storm of Swords.
My Google search said he was 9, but I don't know if that's factual.
But so I mean that's another thing of like the age being an issue in the books.
They said his age in this book. I remember.
I'm sure they do.
He was talking about how he just turned because he was complaining about how he's like,
I love that edition.
He had his little Ariel moment of like, I'm 16 years old.
Noelle's saying Bran is 7 and Arya's 9. That sounds right.
The reason it's going to be an issue though is like, granted, everybody's a little bit young for like the kind of power and position they're in, but a Storm of Swords, like he's not. Is he 9 by the end of that? Is he 10? Like to get.
Then I think he's 8 in this book.
But to get to like where, assuming that it follows loosely what the show does, like unless there is a time jump that Gurm still ends up writing into the books, like it's going to be kind of hard to get to some of this with how they're so young.
I think, yeah, I agree with you. And I actually think we should talk about this when we get to A Feast for Crows, because I want to sit down and really think about like the 5-year gap, because my gut feeling is that it's Gurm's biggest mistake not doing it. But
or then just to have them be older.
Yeah, so maybe actually the bigger mistake is the age. But here's the thing, like these kids are going through horrible shit. So like why can't they be a king? Like why not? It's fantasy. I think
Well, also the fact that in the historical time period that he's drawing from, like people did inherit power at those ages.
True. That's true. And maybe a little bit of reality got too mixed in with this story because of the show, right? Because like they had to make it digestible. So maybe it's not actually that big of a deal, but I think it's interesting that George himself said he wanted to age the characters. Yeah. And I think we should I think it'd be fun if we looked at like some of the interviews where he talks about it and stuff when we do Feast, and then see how that impacts Feast, because I think that when you look at what
you are not allowed to assign us homework.
Yeah.
It's due. Okay.
It's not for a couple months. It's fine.
Yeah. I'm giving you plenty of heads up. You don't have to cite your sources.
Months.
Yeah. Jeez, oh Pete's.
But then Alex has to finish all the first law books so he gets all my references.
I wish he would.
I know Shivers is a character. I know what First Law. I know who Joe Abercrombie is.
Shivers is a character.
I will read more First Law.
He had a wonderful interview on this channel called Lena's Library once. Everyone should go watch it. It was very good. Some booktuber. I don't know. She hates everything.
Oh, I know that. I meant the author. I've never heard of him.
Oh, Joe Anaconda?
I'm more famous than Joe Abercrombie to you, Alex. I like this.
Well, of course. Come on now.
I mean, I do have the crown in this thumbnail.
Oh my god.
Yeah, Noelle says so Bran is now 8 and Arya 10. Okay.
Yeah, they're too young in general. Anyway, so I mean, Theon though, after he takes Winterfell, again, a little bit of a show change of like Winterfell and them are like there to defend it, and Ramsay and the Boltons come up and they're just like, oh, like you're here to help, and then they kind of slaughter everybody.
Also casting for Ramsay.
Very, very good casting.
It's cool that we saw the Roose Bolton foreshadowing the chapter before that happened too.
So that's where he gets the letter. They take over Winterfell, and then Ramsay, because he was Reed, right? And then he walks up to Theon and like bitch slaps him and knocks him out. It's so good. Yeah,
and what's I'm blanking on oh god, Sir Roderick.
Yeah,
Sir Roderick, rip, dead.
Oh yeah,
it's brutal. It's absolutely brutal. Did you guys catch whenever Arya is with Roose and the little Walder Freyboy? I think his name's actually Walder, but the little Freyboy's crying.
All their names Walder.
Yeah, for real.
When in doubt, it's Walder.
One of them's crying, and he said, like, I have to marry someone else now. And she's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, I was supposed to marry a princess. They were talking about Arya, and she's right there. It's so good. I loved it.
Calm down, Jimmy.
I know. It's just like little stuff like that I'll reread these books 10 more times before I die, unless if it's like next week. But
speaking of Arya, because we can just segue back to her, it's like when they're on the King's Road, right before they get attacked, when she's asleep and she hears, because like they keep hearing wolves, and she hears like a bunch of wolves and wakes up, and that's like when the attack happens.
Mm-hmm.
Just, again, it's like you're constantly getting this like interaction with wolves, and like you learn about, well, I don't think it straight up says that it's Nymeria, but like the wolf pack is like a thing. Like Nymeria is leading like dozens, if not hundreds, of wolves like across the country hunting, and like they did a terrible payoff of that in the show. But it's like that's already mentioned in the books that like that's a thing that's happening.
And her name, when she's asked it, she panics and she says,
She says Nymeria. And they call her name. Yep.
Dude, Nymeria is such a dope name, by the way. Definitely gonna be my next pet's name for sure.
I mean, it's better than Shaggy Dog.
Shaggy Dog is so bad.
Rickon kind of sucks. Anyway,
Rickon sucks, okay?
Rickon is a child.
Fuck Rickon. Rickon sucks, okay?
Rickon is the spunkier Tommen.
I shouldn't swear on your channel, Alex. I'm sorry.
We've already sworn so many
I was
times.
gonna say, Alex
Yeah,
never
you're right,
swears.
I don't care.
So we're talking about the kids. What do we talk about Mom? Why don't we talk about Catelyn, who is
Catelyn's boring.
She's sure, but she's the motor in the story of Clash of Kings. She's the motor. She goes and sees. She introduces Brienne.
Also, that I mean, I obviously remembered that Brienne becomes very loyal to Catelyn, but I honestly forgot why. Like, I forgot the exact moment
because
where Brienne is
Renly's
like,
dead.
right, and so then I was like, oh yeah.
and
I mean,
her
it
flashing back to
happens
Ned,
roughly similarly in the show.
dude. Whenever they bring Ned's bones, that was rough, huh?
Sorry, did you cry?
No, but man, it did hit me because I was just thinking about how tragic would that be if like the person you love is laid off for inners, and she just says these are just bones. These are not. This is not Ned. And then we get a little piece, and it's one line. Ice isn't with him.
Are we gonna start this nonsense?
Well, no, I'm just saying, like,
no, I'm talking about
wonderful people.
Chat. Yeah. No, keep going. I'm just gonna start banning people when they do dumb shit because it's a live stream on my channel, so there's got to be these goofballs.
Well, they can't take away from the fact that ice isn't with Ned's body, and you just think if you chalk that away, you say, well, where is it? Who has it?
For sure.
You
also like what?
But we know who has it.
Who has it?
Ice.
Mm-hmm.
What's his name in King's Landing?
Illian Payne.
Yeah,
but I feel like it. Yeah, well, we know that, right? But she
it's not a mystery.
No, it's not. But
this one we know the answer to.
Right, we do know the answer to. You are
Sansa
correct.
sees it, right?
Yeah, Sansa sees it, and she's like, "Why does he have ice?" But I think that it's interesting for the fact that he mentions it there, and Catelyn doesn't know who has it, and she doesn't know the tragedy that the guy who beheaded has ice and all this stuff. And I think that tells you that, where is ice going to end up? Even though it's with Illian Payne, there's a pretty good chance that it's going to go somewhere. It's a Valyrian steel sword, so I doubt the head's going to keep it.
Just speaking of that, it's another instance of George R. R. Martin doing a great job of just trickling in information in a way that you're probably going to remember it without ever telling you that you need to remember it. That Valyrian steel, and also then what's it called? What do they call obsidian?
Dragonglass.
Dragonglass, like those things, like the way that they get brought up in ways that you notice them without anyone being like, "This is important. Notice it."
Yeah. Yeah, and he also uses Catelyn as a motor to foreshadow a lot of things. And Derry said this in our last live stream in the chat. She said that like Catelyn Stark's instincts are great, and it's true. She's mother knows best. Like George wrote her that way, and she is the whole time Theon's doing stuff, even whenever he's not being a dick. She's like, "I don't like Theon." She's like, you shouldn't send Theon to the Iron Islands. It's a bad idea. And guess what? It was a bad idea.
Well, the thing is, though, like, because we have seen at least a little bit of Theon and our experience as a reader of Theon, you're kind of like, yeah, Catelyn, like, I'm with you. Like, why? No, don't send Theon.
I mean, even if you thought he was going to be a good guy, like that probably is the worst like envoy you could send is like, here's the guy that we took from you.
The guy that has troubled loyalties at best.
Like,
yeah.
Literally send anybody else.
If we think Catelyn has good instincts, is she right about Jon Snow?
What do you mean right about Jon Snow?
She hates him. So should we also be sus?
But I mean, like having instincts about Theon, she's got no personal reason to hate Theon. I mean, she does have like an irrational personal reason to hate Jon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm trying to rile up the Catelyn haters. That's all.
I mean, she's kind of hateful anyway, and that's why she comes back.
Yeah, she's brutal, especially to Jon. And like, Dude, John is one of the most tragic characters I've read, and it didn't really settle on me until this read through of Clash of Kings, because he abandons Robb, right? Because of the duty that was a result of a rash decision that he made to join the Night's Watch, which wasn't what he expected. And then at the end of Clash of Kings, he has to kill Halfhand out of duty again, and because he let the girl live, right? Ingrid live, and it's a repeating pattern for him of bad decisions, like him trying to do the right thing
and just being naive too.
Yeah, and just being naive.
Like
in a lot of ways,
he had this image of the wall and like being this like righteous.
But then he almost has like
movement.
a mirror of himself in Samwell Tarly, because like when Sam wants to save Gilly, and John's like, "Why would you send her to me? What am I supposed to do about this?" Because he's like, "Now I'm sad about this because I also would like to help her, but guess what? We can't. So stop it."
Yeah, he's kind of. It's interesting because I don't believe that he's Ned's son, but he does embody Ned kind of after Ned's gone, of just fumbling the bag, man. Like, and it's tough because John doesn't really belong anywhere either, kind of like Theon in a lot of ways. And
except I don't think Ned would lie and dishonor himself and then pretend to join the wildlings. Ned would be like,
but he lied and dishonored himself for John.
But
Ned would die in the cave. If it was Ned and Halfhand, Ned would be like,
he'd be like, "No, you kill me then."
Yeah, you're right.
I don't stand down for wildlings, and then would die.
Yeah.
So
do you all think Halfhand is Arthur Dayne? That's like a big theory. Like Arthur Dayne, he was at Tower of Joy.
Yeah, but
Sword of the Morning.
So I haven't read. There's a lot of theories that I've read.
But also, like, what difference does it make if he is?
It doesn't. It's just for fun. Well, here's the thing, though.
You know how long it's been since the books came out? Every theory has come and gone.
Well, the interesting thing about Halfhand is that people talked about how Arthur Dayne was extraordinarily talented with his other hand. And then, if his dominant hand was gone, he was in Corn Halfhand's still a phenomenal fighter. But if you go back and read all the John chapters from Clash of Kings, there's tons of Dorne phrases. The stars were falling through the night and welcoming the morning. Like just stuff like that. It's really Dornish.
Yeah.
Now some people say, "Hey, that's a foreshadowing for John." I don't think it is. It's fun to think about. Maybe it's a red herring. Like maybe George wanted to layer it a little bit and like throw people off. It's probably possible.
But I'm wondering, so like, what the theory behind that is? That just one of those where it's like, hey, that would be kind of cool if that was Arthur Dayne, or like, would it actually?
Well, nobody thinks it makes any sense that Howland Reed and Ned Stark and whoever else beat Corn Halfhand at Tower of Joy.
Yeah.
So what did Corn Halfhand do? Did he stand down? Did he say, "I'll take the black," and just go to the wall? And this is one of those things where he could get away for like people knowing him, because people just don't recognize people. They just don't know what they look like. They don't have Facebook in Westeros yet. So
hopefully they'll never have Westeros. That'll be the true
Bran
end.
setting up internet as we speak. But
so what Derry just said about John deliberately trying to be like Ned, messing him up. I mean, I just honestly, like, all of his kids in their own ways are working through the legacy that, like, the life training that they got from Ned, and how not like all of them are ill prepared for the world because Ned trained them to think the world is the way that Ned wants the world to be. And so like Robb, the way that he operates in battle, Arya has a quick like learning curve, Sansa has a quick learning curve, like them realizing the world is not what Ned said it was, and it hurts all of them until they finally come to grips with that and accept that the world is not that way.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, that train of thought works in the North, and that also establishes.
But also works if you're the one in charge, which Ned was.
Yes.
He could make the world what he wanted it to be, but if you're not in charge,
I mean, the North is its own thing. So, like and obviously the scene book to show is a little bit different. Like the demands that Robb sends to King's Landing are different. But like when he's laying down the like, I'll release a prisoner every year or whatever if you release my sisters, and like. He has this whole thing of like, here's the set of circumstances, and then we'll have peace. Like, we're going to do our own thing. It's like, he actually kind of thinks that like that could happen. And everyone is just like, they're not going to go for this. Like, they're the Lannisters. They're terrible.
I was going to say, I mean, the fact that like, okay, so the approach to this kind of negotiation, Robb is going to, this is what my plan would be. I think everyone could win. Here's a legitimate proposal. Versus the other side is like, what do we propose that we could like stretch time, make a game out of this? How do we trick them into this? Like, they're not genuinely putting forth a proposal I think anyone should or would accept. So they are already approach it as a game versus like the North is like, here's how it will be, here's what we mean, we say what we mean what we say, and like no one else is operating like that.
Yeah, I mean, look at the Karstarks and every. I mean, they're all just so absolutely ridiculous. Like they're not quite barbarians, you know, because that's the wildlings, but they're real close. They're really, really close.
They're somewhat civilized barbarians.
Yep, Baba, absolutely agree with you. I think House of Undying is one of the best chapters in.
Yes, we haven't really talked about Dany.
I already have. I have it pulled up. We're gonna go through every vision. we're gonna do the whole damn thing.
So 5 of those 6 pages are just a deconstruction of the vision.
True. Just a copy and paste.
All right, so then let's branch over to Dany then. So they're walking through the desert forever, and unlike the show, is it Ago or which one comes back with his head cut off?
I don't
whichever one of the Dothraki, like that doesn't happen, and the 13 actually come out to greet them like outside of Karth, like immediately, and then that's when we get a lot of the like weird stuff that starts happening in this book, like magical, weird, mysterious. Like we meet Quaithe.
Yeah, Dany's much better in this book.
Yes,
much better.
So start with some notes. What do you got?
Well, first off, Karth is one of the best settings in all of fantasy. George describes it magnificent, like Dany walking through and seeing the artwork of all the naked people, and then she's like chastising herself, but she goes, I've seen men tortured and killed. Why can't I look at someone sucking on a nipple? Like it's not that big of a deal.
The greatest city that ever was or will be.
Yeah, and you kind of get this grandioso, like majestic feeling whenever she's talking about Karth. So I thought that George did he's the best. I think he's the best at landscape.
Hey, Alex, do you think Jimmy's a fan of George R. R. Martin?
No.
All right, folks. And then we also meet Quaithe, right? Yep. Which is a shadow buyer from a Shy, which is very interesting. And then we have the House of the Undying, which we can break down, and I'd love to hear you guys.
So before we do the House of the Undying,
we can break down like Jimmy hasn't already.
Let's talk about Karth before we get to the House of the Undying. So just like the warlocks being a thing, this grand city in the middle of effing nowhere.
Yeah.
Has all these wealth and riches and food, and
it feels like a mirage almost, doesn't it?
Right? And you got like Zoran Daxos like just promising to marry her and like, hey, you can come stay in my house. I can fit all of you. And it's literally just like the biggest house ever, like can house hundreds of people. And they just came from like slumming it in the deserts with nothing to eat or drink.
Yeah, and you get this feeling that like there's some sort of like, you know, you have all these riches and all this art and stuff, and then like you start hearing, oh, there's boy servants and things, and you're just like, it's a little creepy. Like it's a tad uncomfortable.
Something off.
Yeah, and Jorah is on edge the whole time.
Yeah.
Jorah's not having.
I was gonna say Jorah's on edge at all times.
All the time.
Not just he's just extra on edge.
And also, I love warlocks, by the way. Like, I'm just so into warlocks. Anytime they're in any book, I love it. I don't know. It's just something about the name. I know that sounds ridiculous.
I was about to say, is it because they combine war and hair? And those are your favorite things?
Yeah. How'd you know? But Pirate Pri is so creepy. And the show did very well. Pirate Pri is disturbing.
He was rightfully disturbing in that.
So disturbing. I believe he was a warlock. Like, I want to know, what does that guy do for, like, every day? Does he go to 7-Eleven like that?
Probably.
I mean, he's an actor. He probably has somebody to go to 7-Eleven.
He's hideous. So brutal.
So let's talk about Quaithe then real quick before we get to the warlock shenanigans.
Yeah, like, I don't know. That's obviously something that they completely abandoned in the show, and we know that. But, like, I think, and Quaithe shows up later in the books in A Dance with Dragons, I think that Quaithe's one of the more interesting questions that we have left.
Why does she wear a mask?
Yeah, and then
weird.
I can't remember there's a theory about who she is, and I can't remember exactly who it was, so I'm failing terribly at that. And I'm trying to pull up more notes. I mean, the fact that she comes from a Shy is pretty dope.
She also she warns Dany to like be suspicious of everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone.
I was going to say the same advice Littlefinger gave Ned.
Well, he did warn him not to trust him.
Or anyone.
Yeah, but he straight up said, like, trusting me is, or he's like, not trusting me is the best thing that you've done since you've been here or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I told you not to trust me. Also, Quaithe touches Daenerys' wrist, and her wrist tingles after. And I thought that was also kind of interesting. Because why? Why did that happen? And then she just disappears. She's just gone.
Yeah.
And then she told Dany that she must pass beneath the shadow, and that she would find truth in a shy. So I wonder if we'll see a shy in the books.
Good.
I mean, we won't because no other books will ever be published. But...
Leanna, get that pessimistic shit out of here. George is doing media right now, guys. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so like, just because I'm looking up some of her quotes and like prophecy that she says, it's like to go north, you must journey south. To reach the west, you must go east. To go forward, you must go back. And to touch the light, you must pass beneath the shadow. It's like, what?
Yeah, they shall come down.
Alice in Wonderland.
Well, shall last fire made flesh fire's power. Yeah, she basically insinuates everyone's going to want something from her. And then obviously in the Dance of Dragons, she talks about the glass candles burning, with all tied to the citadel, and to get so layered later. Dance of Dragons, I think we're going to have a blast talking about it. I'm so excited.
Yeah, so
are you not having a blast talking about Game of Thrones and Clash of Kings?
I'm having a smashing time talking.
There's several theories of who Quaithe is, but I guess one of the more popular ones is actually from Fire and Blood, that she's Alyssa Farman, but I haven't even read Fire and Blood, so I don't understand that.
We're going to, though.
Yes, we are.
The Song of Ice and Fire read along will never end.
I'm fine with this.
Neither will A Song of Ice and Fire.
God damn.
Fitting.
Shiera Seastar herself says Dairy, and I think that's the name I was looking for. Daughter of Blood Raven. Yeah, there's some sort of like a shy tie to his daughter, and all that craziness. Speaking of Blood Raven, I wanted to note that in one of John's chapters, they actually talk about Maekar and Arion and Aegon and Darion, which is all like stuff we actually end up getting in Dunk and Egg, which is pretty badass. Like, George clearly had those thought out prior to when he wrote them, which is really cool.
Well, I mean, okay, so like that's the thing too. Like, so some books really feel like the author has built this world and has thought of all this history, and now whether it fits in here or not, they want to cram it down your throat because, gosh darn it, they thought of this magic system and they thought of this history, and you're gonna get told it. Whereas George R.R. Martin, like, he thought of all of this so he can draw on it if and when he needs to. But if he doesn't need to, if it doesn't suit the scene, if it doesn't suit the plot,
you could take it or leave it. You could drop it. Doesn't matter. Yeah, I agree.
All right, so go ahead.
House of the Undying time?
Yes.
All right.
And go.
All right. So she goes in the House of Undying. We're in the long hall. She passes many rooms containing visions before she reaches the chambers.
Don't forget to breathe, Jimmy.
The visions include, and this is part 1, and then we have 16 other ones after these 6. Number 1, a beautiful naked woman ravished by 4 little men who resemble the dwarf servitor who gives her the shades. I can't remember the whatever. Yes, thank you. And it turns her lips blue and all that stuff. So there's a woman being ravished by 4 little men. A lot of people
are they drinking spice?
I don't think they are. A lot of people feel like this is the War of the 5 Kings with Renly dead. There's only 4. I think that's probably correct. The woman being Westeros, being fought over and sought after.
Or her being the woman and the other kings.
Yes. What do you guys think about if it was Marjorie Tyrell?
If the woman in the vision is Marjorie?
Yeah, with 4 men on her. So she's already had Renly. So then she has Joffrey. Then she has Tommen. And I believe that she will then have young Griff, which will then lead to her beheading.
Good.
I think she's a stand-in for Anne Boleyn in the story.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Drawing that parallel. And since young Griff wasn't a thing in the show, I mean, it's a book-only thing.
Wait, but I mean, Anne Boleyn didn't go through husbands. It was Henry VIII that went through wives.
Well, the decapitation would be the because they even remark about how Marjorie's neck is very thin, and George is very big into that time period in history.
Yeah.
So that's
her neck is thin, so it's easier for cutting.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what you meant, right?
I don't think it's Marjorie in the vision, but I think it's interesting to think about. Like, that's like maybe.
Well, also, because I mean, are these visions meant to be for Dany? In which case, why does she need to see?
Or she's just Marjorie. Well, do you think there's any? So part of that vision, it says they have rat-like faces.
Yeah, I was kind of fixated on that as
What
well.
the hell does that mean?
I don't know the significance of rats. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that is historically, does that mean something?
Well, plague.
Ooh. And I think there's going to be a plague of grayscale. I kind of believe that in a lot of ways.
Coming from who though?
Noel just said, "Damn, Jimmy, I'm too drunk for this." Leanna, to answer your question, I don't think all these pertain to Dany because the Red Wedding is foreshadowed here, which has nothing to do with her, really. So I think that we could take these and kind of run with them if we wanted to. But let's be honest, the woman's probably Westeros with the 4 kings.
I was gonna say, I mean, like because like the woman being Westeros and the 4 kings, like that affects Dany because like this is the political map that she's been playing with. Similarly, the Red Wedding took one of those kings off the board. That affects Dany. So like, but it being Marjorie, not so much.
Yeah, and well, I think maybe there's the Young Griff tie-in, but I don't know if George even knew Young Griff existed at this point because by this book, he was still writing a trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
Like his outline still existed.
Can you imagine like just one more book after this?
He wanted to end it at the Red Wedding, which is banana sandwich.
But like, just to show you that everything sucks and this world's terrible and there's if you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention. And that just ends.
I would have loved it if it ended at the Red Wedding. Would have been pretty amazing.
Don't lie, Jimmy, because you want more.
I always want more. Don't
tell me you'd have been happy if it ended after 3 books.
No, you're right, and I actually think that there's a lot of really good shit in the last 2 as well.
Yeah. All right. So next vision.
All right. A feast of slaughtered corpses holding cups, spoons, and food, with a dead man with a wolf's head sitting on a throne wearing an iron crown, apparently foreshadowing the Red Wedding.
That one's like the most obvious one, right?
Yeah. Well, the first time I read it, I didn't see it. I was like,
well, I mean, obviously.
I was like, does that mean like, Rickon's gonna be king because he's a wolf? I just didn't. I don't know. I'm an idiot. Obviously, as I read more and more, I figured it out.
Hindsight is 2020.
I mean, if you're just reading this book for the first time and there is no book 3 or TV show, you're probably at most thinking, okay, like a Stark is going to die at some kind of feast, not what actually happens.
Which, again, if we take this as an individual book released in 1998 or whenever it was, pretty crazy that he had this flattened out. I don't think we give enough credence to that because we know the story. But if you're someone who goes into this blind, I mean, this is insane. I
mean, we said it on the Game of Thrones chat. It's like there's so much in it that you're just like, oh my god,
he's a madman.
Also, I mean, like I was saying in the chat when we were just talking about this book, just like how many, from little to big, how much like this series is a masterclass in planting and payoff.
Yep.
Because like so many people mess that up where like they didn't plant anything. So then when you try to have payoff, like it's not satisfying. You're like, why isn't it satisfying? It's epic. You're like, because you didn't plant anything for me to then want to see payoff for. And the other way around as well, where like they'll plant a bunch of stuff, but then never follow it up because they didn't really have a plan for a payoff. So it's absolutely masterclass. And like, again, little things where like a little comment gets paid off later in that scene, just in terms of like a dialogue, where that joke comes back into it. And like, it makes, that's what makes it the dialogue so rich often. But then big things like, visions being planted where you don't know what they mean. And they may not pay off even in that same book.
Yeah.
There's no, it's not hurried. It's not like plant it and the next chapter pay off, because that makes it feel cheap. And that makes it feel like, oh, you tell me things, so immediately they're going to get paid off. And so it's,
yeah, and what he does on the micro is he thematically connects a lot of his chapters. Erickson does that as well, and it's like one of my favorite things. Frank Herbert does it too, which is probably where George got the motivation from, I would assume. So the third vision, Daenerys, and this is interesting, and I don't really understand all the stuff that goes around this, but Daenerys' childhood house with the red door and Bravos, along with Sir William Derry. There's a scene now also later that comes up. Number 4, a throne room with dragon skulls on the walls, where a king resembling Aerys the Targaryen II sits on a barbed throne and appears to give the order to burn the Red Keep during the sack of King's Landing. That's pretty self-explanatory.
Yep.
A room where a silver-haired man, presumably Rhaegar, is with a woman and a baby. The man names his son Aegon and says the child is the prince that was promised, and then plays a harp, which is interesting because Aegon died.
Yep.
Supposedly. This is actually,
And
I never
less.
did this. I just took it for truth that the kid died. But if young Griff is not a false flag, that means that he's the prince who was promised. Like, now that I'm thinking about it, like, we are all everyone thinks that it's Fagon, right? It's fake Aegon.
Yep.
But now that I'm sitting here and it's like, why did Rhaegar think Aegon was the one? And I remember, if you remember, he says there has to be 3 heads to the dragon, which is where Jon comes in. That's interesting.
Well, let us know what you decide.
No, I'm curious. Like, what do you guys think? Like, do you think that means that Aegon is actually like the second child is the most important?
But just going off of, Rhaegar is not an expert on, you know what I mean? Like, why would he know any better? Like, any parent thinks their child is special.
That's true. That's true. And also, I have to wonder, like, where and why there had to be 3 heads to the dragon. Like, if you just had the Prince of His Promise, why do you need a third? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's so interesting. God. Stop it. Quit making fun of me, Leah.
I just love how many times in A Song of Ice and Fire Live your mind gets blown by yourself.
It's the most self-flating shit ever.
You just sit there like, so this thing, and then, oh wow, and you just like have fun by yourself.
Well, if you take away the things that we assume are correct, right? Because we don't have all the published books.
R plus L equals J.
Yeah, which I'm pretty on board with that. Like, I'm 99% sure that's true. But this brings up a lot of questions about young Griff. Man, I can't.
But then you can play the game of, if it got taken out of the show, is it because it's gonna amount to nothing and it's a red herring all along?
I would lean more towards it would get too confusing in the show, because they literally changed Asha's name to Yara because they didn't want people to get confused with Osha. Like,
and also,
I think they think TV watchers are real dumb, which is why they streamlined the hell out of this. Which is also why I think George is taking so long to write it, because he's probably trying to figure out how the hell to map this all and tie it up.
Yeah, it's not an easy task at all. And did you see the article that came out where it said that George apparently flew to New York?
10 seasons.
Yeah, and apparently I had heard the number was 13, but if his agent says 10,
he said it the first. He had said early on that he wanted 13 seasons because he thought there was enough material. I mean, that's insane. Like,
that's so long.
Even 10 is a lot. But I mean, they did 8 and they cut the last 2 down to basically 1 season. They could have done 10.
Yeah, and HBO offered him the contract and they turned it down, which is on brand for those chuckleheads. All right, I'll move on here. Let's see. Oh, number 6. So, a splendor of wizards who falsely claim to be the undying of Karth and offer to teach Daenerys the secret speech of dragonkind. I don't know if this really means much. Like, I don't. If it does, I have no idea what it means. Like, none. 0. The only thing that's interesting is to teach her a secret speech of the dragonkind alludes that there is a way to speak to dragons. And a huge difference between the show and the books is Daenerys is not in control of her dragons in the books. She is not like herding them around and have all this control. They're very much more feral in the books than they are in the show. There's not like that telepathic thing going on there. So after reaching the gloomy chamber of the Undying Ones, Daenerys is also shown, and then cue this, the death of her brother Viserys, which we saw. Number 2, a tall lord with copper skin and silver gold hair beneath a banner of a fiery stallion burning with the burning city in the background. We believe that this is probably what Rhaego would have been if he had been born, right? He was the stallion, the mouth of the world. He probably would have been burning cities and all those pleasant things. Number 3 is a dying prince, which I assume is Rhaegar, mutters a woman's name with his last breaths, rubies flying from his chest. Lyanna, right? Or was it Daenerys?
Why would it be Daenerys?
Why not?
Because what?
Well, I don't think it actually is Daenerys.
It'd be Lyanna.
Yeah, it's Lyanna for sure. Which is interesting because that means that they really were in love. So like, I guess we.
I totally buy into the whole like they were actually in love. They had a kid. It was John. Like that is cemented in my brain. Is like I can't see it being anything else.
Yeah, Lyanna is not one to be taken victim. I think she's the Knight of the Laughing Tree. Like I think she's a badass. I don't see her being a damsel in distress at all. Yeah, I really don't. Number 4, a blue-eyed king who casts no shadow raises a red sword in his hand. Stannis.
What is he? Does he have blue eyes?
So he has blue eyes, and I think I've always wondered about the no shadow.
But I was gonna say, why couldn't it also be? I mean, I know that's not in the books; that's in the show, but
Night
something
King.
similar to the Night King. Yeah.
Certainly, yeah. Actually, that's a good point. But why would he have a
White
red?
Walker.
I mean, they make such a big deal about the blue eyes of the White Walkers.
Yeah.
But what about the red sword? Because like we see Stannis get a flaming sword in the prologue, and I took the no shadow. I've thought about this a lot, and I think no shadow signifies that he's a fake, that he's not real.
But there's also all the playing with shadows and the fact that you can manipulate shadows. So the not having of a shadow, does that signify some kind of like Melisandre style magic?
That's actually a good point too, because she comes from the shadow of a shy, right? So
Yeah.
that's an
She
interesting one.
Birth shadow. So who's to say she can't take Stannis' shadow away from him and do something with it?
Yeah, and is Stannis more? Is he less human with her around in the magic that he's doing? There's a theory
that would be so weird. Like it would be kind of dope, but at the same time, I'd be like, how?
I would not put it past George for the others to be the good guys at the end of the story. By the way, it seems like a George thing to do.
I mean, I definitely don't think that they're just going to be what they were in the show.
No, that's probably the biggest discretion of what exists in both is the others, I would say.
Because I definitely want them to have like a purpose and not just be a bunch of zombies that like swarm Winterfell and die.
And they kill all of the Dothraki except for none of the Dothraki.
Exactly.
Do you all
need
think
King's Landing to be covered in ice and have the Night King or the Great Other, whatever we want to call him in the book, sitting on the Iron Throne at some point?
Do you all think that there will be a Night King in the books? To me,
something
there's got to be some kind of like leader in some form or fashion of them, right?
You know who I think it is? Euron.
Bran.
I think it's Euron.
How though?
Well,
it would be sick because he's kind of like a wizard, like weirdo, but
he's gonna get the horn in the books.
Yeah.
And he's gonna blow the horn that brings down the wall.
I definitely see that happening.
Yeah. We'll see.
I don't know how much that would mean. I guess for that to work, for him to be like in charge of them, though, it would mean that either the horn controls them or somehow they're intelligent enough to recognize that he's like a leader of some kind. Like,
well, he claims himself to be a god, and he is very apocalyptic in the way he's like displayed through the text. I think it'll be interesting to reread those because I remember not being super into like all those chapters in A Dance with Dragons. So I'm excited to reread those and take a deeper look because I do think Euron could. I mean, he's the only one that I can think of that would make sense.
Makes sense to what?
To be like a figure, to lead the others because of all the apocalyptic imagery.
I just don't think we're gonna meet like a leader unless
they
actually do some kind of thing of like where I don't know. I'm trying to not take a lot of what the show did as like what George had in mind.
Canon,
because I find that there's got to be a different way to bring the wall down. Like I don't think they're gonna go north and try to kidnap a zombie and go to King's Landing and lose a dragon just to raise a dragon and be like, haha, now I can take the wall down. Like, I don't think any of that's gonna happen.
No, that is such a TV move. And also I think the Night King's a TV move.
It absolutely is.
You know, to have
that's why when you said do you think there's a Night King, I was like something like that, meaning like a sort of more better, specialer central force of thinking power behind it all, but not like Mr. Ice Prince with the horny head and
I don't see it being like that.
This is the issue and why we still don't have wins, because I think going from initially having a trilogy to expanding it to where he did, and that was at 5 of 7, this exactly becomes a problem because
he did go from 3 to 5 to 7. He said it would be.
Well, it's also, I mean, it's the problem that like it's not like, okay, I need more than one book to wrap this up. It's like, well, but what if I also introduce a whole bunch of new plot threads? And you're like, no, you're supposed to use this to wind it down.
Yeah, he was definitely going more towards like the 10-book epic, you know.
Yeah.
don't need to be on the same side for them to work
Good
through the same
point.
objective. That Derry, that's a very good point.
But
That's a very
what
good
is the objective of the others?
Euron just wants to be a god.
Yeah.
It would appear. So I don't know. It'll be interesting. I'm really excited to reread those Iron Island chapters because I think I missed a lot of those. Like I said, I'm not really big into the Iron Islands, to be honest. So it's probably
It's
my
cold
least.
and it
I was gonna say
sucks.
that's interesting because like I'm always way more excited to read about the Iron Islands than about Dany.
See, and I love Dany.
I like
So-
Dany.
I don't dislike Dany, but I just find like I don't know.
Oh.
You get so much about like the story and the world with Dany's chapters.
But I guess
George sets up
I also
continents with Dany. It's pretty impressive.
I also feel like that I don't know, it bothers me, or maybe bothers isn't the right word, but I just feel like I have so much of a richer basis for context and knowledge of Westeros because there's so many eyes on Westeros, and Dany all by herself
So
over here,
separated.
the only eye on what's going on. I feel like I don't actually have a good grasp of like where she is, and it's not because it's badly written, it's just
I mean,
because
that's a
she's
good
the
point,
only
though.
eye on it.
Yeah.
And so I'm just like,
Yes.
she's just out over here, whatever. Meanwhile, Westeros is rich with like, oh, and that's connected to this and connected to this, and they've told me about this, but they told me about it differently than how this person is telling me about it because they're
I
seeing
mean, that
it
could be on
differently.
purpose, though, right?
So-
'Cause, like, you're only getting her.
Yeah, but so I mean,
perspective.
that's for that reason. It's less exciting for me to read about because
Yeah,
I'm like,
I
oh, a
see it.
new weird thing in the desert,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, and it's also very linear. Like it's always where you left off usually with Dany. I do think it's interesting that we're going to have more POVs from that in wins, like with Barristan. Barristan has a POV confirmed now.
Mhm.
So, and then Tyrion's over there now. So, like, I think it's going to get a lot more interesting. But I do think it's
Oh, yeah.
impressive that he sets up continents worth of politics through one POV.
Yeah.
And it feels believable for the most part, being through like a 17 or 18-year-old girl.
It's not that Dany's chapters are bad. It's just that
Yeah,
she's the only one. And
Mhm.
like,
Totally
if
fair.
if all the chapters were with all different characters where she's at, and the only eyes we had on the north were Jon, and we had no other idea for what's going on
Yeah.
in Westeros, I'd be like, well, okay, he's up there with some ice and some weird stuff's going on. But let's get back to the,
Yeah,
the
and
desert where all the
John
stuff
has
is.
Samwell. Dany doesn't have that, the yin and yang.
Yeah.
I think that's fair. And to be honest, like a lot of people struggle with Dany chapters, especially in dance.
Yeah.
So, speaking of A Dance with Dragons, Vision 5, a cloth dragon sways on poles amidst a cheering crowd. Everyone thinks this is young Griff being the Mummer's dragon. Probably.
I mean, it's a Targaryen, it's a Targaryen banner at some point, right? Of like being in charge somewhere,
Yeah.
leading an army.
Which is fair, I think. This one, I have no idea. A great stone beast takes wings from a smoking tower, breathing shadows.
Sounds like a stone dragon.
Yeah, it sounds like a stone dragon, or could it
Well,
be
I mean,
Greystone?
Dragonstone, and that's where Melisandre and her shadows are. So
Mhm.
like,
But that already happened. Well, I guess she could see some things that already happened, right?
Yeah,
she saw Rhaegar.
and we all know that like people think young Griff's a Blackfire or just a out
Mhm.
fraud, but maybe to Dany he's the Mummer's dragon because she's the dragon. You know what I mean? Like she has the dragons. Like,
Yeah.
wouldn't it be interesting that if he is legitimately Aegon, but she doesn't care?
So
That would
young
be
Griff
cool.
and Dany are gonna fight for the throne.
Yeah,
But after she sleeps with him.
certainly. The more important tag here is the cheering crowd. Whoever Mummer's dragon is loved. Yeah, I think to not go off the rails here, but I think that young Griff will win King's Landing from Cersei, because the people hate Cersei.
I think that's a pretty like bought into theory.
Yeah, and then that's why I think Marjorie always jumps kings, and I see her jumping to young Griff's side to marry to give a strong alliance. And I think young
Marjorie's
Griff-
entire plot line in all of A Song of Ice and Fire. Thank you, next.
Yeah. Oh, survived another one.
Vision 7, Daenerys Silver, which is her horse from
Horse. Yeah.
her horse, trots through grass to a darkling stream under a sea of stars. I don't know what that means. Number 8, a corpse standing at the prow of a ship with bright eyes and gray smiling lips. I think that is either I think it's Euron, to be honest, because it's on a ship. Some people say it's grayscale. Like people seem to be really bought in on the grayscale having a huge impact, which I could see maybe, but I think it's Euron. I think that one makes the most sense.
Yeah, because the bright eyes, like if it was grayscale, I don't know that the bright eyes would be like that impactful, you'd be like, this guy looks like he's made of stone.
Yes, and Euron's eyes are very they're described multiple times in the books. So I think it's safe to say it's probably Euron.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
Her
Riding
horse
through the
riding
Nightlands.
Oh, good one, Noelle. Noelle knows her stuff, man. Number 9, a blue flower growing from a chink in a wall of ice, filling the air with sweetness. Obviously, this is Jon. Obviously, right? And the Bale the Bard story came right before this, which is cool. Number 10, boneless, terrible shadows whirl inside of a tent. Obviously, we know what that is. A little girl like Daenerys runs barefoot towards a big house with a red door. Mary Mazdor's death by pyre. The corpse of the wine cellar who had attempted poison on Daenerys being dragged behind her silver. Number 14, a white lion running through tall grass. I think that's Tyrion, because it's a lion that is going through grass about as tall as them. So I figure it's Tyrion running, like, is coming to her. That's kind of what I maybe thought.
Is it tall grass because he's so short?
Yes. Yes. I'm being heightist. Is that a word?
Does the color of the lion signify?
Well, that's what I also. I mean, lion. Obviously, we relate with Lannister, but why is he white?
Because he's also left his family. Like, he's not with them anymore. He doesn't side with them anymore.
Yeah,
and all the Targaryens have white hair.
Yeah, and another thing is, like, lions aren't white, so it's an outcast. It's different. It's a different.
But again, if it's a
lion.
lion that's changed its colors to Targaryen colors.
Shit, you're right. Yeah, you're right. Because obviously, a white lion, its fur and hair is white. That actually, secret Targaryen confirmed. Number 15, naked crones emerging from a great lake beneath the mother of mountains to kneel before Daenerys. I think that's alluding to her whenever she gets taken to the place with all the other Khal's wives. I can't remember.
Dothraki.
Yes, thank you.
I think that's anything about these books.
I know it's embarrassing, right? 16, 10,000 slaves crying mother as Daenerys rides past.
Misa.
Yes. So I think there's some stuff in here that's, like, really obvious, and then that's the last one. But there's also a lot of stuff in here that is very open for interpretation.
Yeah.
The prow of the ship, probably Euron, but who knows? The Nightlands could be in there. And I like that George mixes in stuff from the past and obviously the future. It may be stuff that doesn't even ever happen, like seeing her son, Rhaego, right? Yeah. Burning cities. So it's like, how much of this could have been, how much of it is, and how much of it will be.
It's definitely a good thing they didn't cross the narrow sea with all of the Dothraki, because they would just destroy everything.
Yeah. White lion is the color of the pelt that Drogo left her.
Oh, because he killed a lion.
Yeah, the pelt that Drogo gave her was of a white lion.
So that could just be one of those that, like, it was just a thing that happened and it's not important.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I could see that. I like the idea.
But also, like, giving an entire vision to that.
Yeah, and also, like, the tall grass
and
lion being the Lannister, right? Like,
could be.
I don't know. It's hard to say. And it's fun to speculate.
Yeah.
About what it might be.
Oh, does Jimmy think it's fun to speculate?
Shit.
Like, not all of our visions were things that are that interesting. Like, Mira Mazdor dying. We already saw that. The wine cellar dying. We saw that. So, like, Viserys dying. We saw that.
Yeah, and I think also Euron being at the prow of the ship makes a lot of sense, because Euron's actually mentioned this book for the first time and how wicked he is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Euron's a big outstanding question. The Reeds are huge, right? Yeah. Howland Reed's the biggest missed opportunity from the show. This is kind of random, but
the Reeds in general just got shafted in the show.
Yeah, they sure did. Poor Mira. So bad. Did we talk about the goat of Blackwater? No, we did not.
We haven't even talked about Blackwater yet.
No, the goat is Tyrion when he says, "Let's go kill those sons of bitches." I was like, let's go, dude. I'm in.
So let's talk about Blackwater then. We talked about Dany. I mean, that's, for the most part, that's what happens with her, right? The House of the
battle that's better than Helm's Deep, according to some.
I mean, it's just incorrect, so I'm not even going to entertain it. Jimmy is wrong, and
defend your position, Jimmy.
We'll speak no more of this heresy.
Listen, I rewatched them both last year,
No,
not
Does it
on
make
purpose.
you an authority?
not hearing it.
I'm just saying it wasn't
Nope.
like a
Mm-mm.
rose tinted glasses.
Nope.
I watched Blackwater Bay episode and I said they really did like a whole hour to this battle,
Mhm.
and I liked it more than Helm's Deep. I did.
It's just your affinity for A Song of Ice and Fire.
100%.
Slash, you've probably, I mean, I don't know if you've seen Lord of the, or how many times you've watched Lord of the Rings, but also like I feel like I know the Battle of Helm's Deep almost beat for beat versus a battle that I've only seen once before. It feels fresh and new because I haven't seen this like so many times that I could like say the lines with them.
Yeah, I think I've seen Helm's Deep like because even though I hadn't rewatched the films a ton, I've watched that scene like when my parents had it on DVD. I would just replay it constantly. Blackwater Bay, I think I've seen 3 or 4 times, but I'd say Helm's Deep I've probably seen like 10. I'd say. So, I mean, I know it's not a popular
Let's
opinion.
talk about Blackwater then.
I mean, Blackwater's incredible. The preparation, the wildfire, everything that gets built up to that. But my favorite part's when the Hound runs away and ends up in Sansa's room. So good.
Also, the way that he's very traumatized by fire. He's like, "Fuck this."
Yeah, and I believe it. Like it's not like there's other series I can think of where they need a character to take a left turn and the character just takes a left turn. And I don't think that this is one of those circumstances. Like I believe.
Are you talking about season 8 of Game of Thrones?
I'm not. I'm actually talking about a moment in Memories of Ice and Melisandre. Actually, there is just a moment.
Spill the tea.
Shots fired.
No, I love Melisandre, but there's a character that makes a decision, and I've heard the justification for why I did it, and I just thought it was silly, which is fine. It happens. But the Hound could have very easily. He could have just like, I've had enough of this. But the Hound remains the Hound while somehow being a coward.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, it's
I don't
also
remember-
because I mean, like the trauma over fire is well established.
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
because his brother.
So like the
literally burned
idea
his
that
face.
he would like kind of lose it, like it's not. I mean, it has been set up very
Yeah.
well.
I don't remember if they said it in the book or if it's just the show, but when he's talking to Sansa after he's like fled the battle, she's like, "What about the king?" He's just like, "Fuck the king."
It's so good.
Yes,
Oh man.
he's just done. So over it.
And you know, Tyrion leads the charge, and he doesn't even, and he gives this amazing speech. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not asking you to fight for Joffrey, the king. I'm not asking you to fight for me. I'm not asking you to fight for the High Sept. I'm asking you to fight. You know, this is your land. Stannis means to take it. Let's go kill those sons of bitches. And then he runs off a dwarf and does not look back to see if anyone follows him.
Yeah.
And it's like that little line that just makes Tyrion so much larger than life.
And then he almost gets assassinated.
Yeah. By what is it, Mandon Moore, right? And
Yeah.
then our boy Podrick.
Podrick Payne. Good old Pod.
Also cast in the show.
Hung like a horse. Just baby arm.
Oh my. They don't even make him pay. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's way more gruesome in the book too, of like his like the whole front of his nose gets cut off.
Yeah.
Like the gash is way bigger.
And he already was much uglier than Peter Dinklage to
Oh
begin
yeah.
with.
Like his misshapen head and his discolored eyes, and like now he looks real pretty. And then him dealing with like the like being bandaged up and trying like taking it off and like seeing himself, just super impactful.
Yeah. Yeah.
The actual consequences, which is just, I
Yeah.
mean, you've come to see from this series that consequences happen, but it's just in general, like the fact that like other books will have your hero get injured and it's something to have a scene where they're abed and they have a bandage.
And then it
like,
won't actually matter.
But like, yeah, they're fine. And like, it just makes them more badass that like, I took a wound, but like, they're fine.
Yeah, there's a book series that I really enjoyed that did that, where the main character like literally gets like an armor, like his leg cut in half, and it like doesn't matter because he just overpowers everybody anyway. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
Or it takes like a gut wound and you're just like, oh, he lived.
Yeah.
Neat. Yeah. Tyrion's face getting cut is also, I think, a catalyst for the beginning of his changes, because obviously, as we'll see in like the next book, like he loses his power. And he starts to become much more dark and gets ostracized even more by his father. So it's kind of like telling of what's about to happen for Tyrion.
Mm-hmm.
And we know Cersei's a shithead, right? Like we
Yeah.
know Cersei's doing bad things, but like she tried to get him killed. Like
Mhm.
that's a whole nother step. Because if you remember, Tyrion even has a moment where he thinks about killing Joffrey to replace Tommen when Bran kind of mentions that, isn't it a shame Tommen's not the oldest?
Mm-hmm.
And Tyrion was like, I would never do that. Like,
Yeah.
he's like, I would never go there. And Cersei goes there.
Yep.
Oh, man. Storm of Swords is going to be so good. I'm so excited.
I'm just excited to finally see more of Jaime.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, we have yet to get much of him. To this
Well, we haven't
point.
had a POV from him at all.
No, but I
Yeah.
mean, even the scenes that he's been in, it's very little.
Yeah, and his arc really does kick off in this book too. So that's why I'm excited for Feast. I'm really excited to reread Feast and appreciate those Jaime chapters.
For sure. Who have we not talked about yet?
A small note, Varys talks about how he became a eunuch and says that he heard voices in the fire.
Yeah.
And he hates R'hllor, which
Yep.
is why he can never support Stannis' claim to the throne. Which I thought was interesting because, like, what voices did Varys hear in the fire? Well, was it R'hllor? You know,
Maybe.
Varys is such an interesting character.
Well, so, I mean, again, I appreciate so much that, like, because you do get enough pieces of information and enough conflicting pieces of information about Peter Baelish, about Varys, about all these sort of people that, like, clearly know more than they're saying, clearly do more than you know about. And you just always have a sense that something more is happening, that there's something more behind it. And the fact that, like, George or R. Martin doesn't feel the need to, like, be like, okay, so here it is. Here's all this clever stuff. And here's, like, because you don't know, that makes it, like, add so much to it. I mean, it's similar to, like, the Hitchcock, method of, like, whatever you don't see is a lot more terrifying than what I could show you. So, like, the fact that he doesn't tell you, he just gives you snatches of information. So you're like, I can't even imagine all of the things that I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it also he kind of puts a lot of stock in word of mouth, but also the power of personal testimony of events. Like, people write books all the time, right? Like, I died and saw heaven, and you're like, I mean, for me, it's like 99%. I'm like, no, you didn't, but
they saw R'hllor.
I even have someone in my family that claims this, and I'm like, no, you didn't. But there is 0.01% of me that goes, what if they're telling the truth?
You would never know.
You know what I mean? Like, what if it wasn't just some chemical reaction in the brain that formulated a vision, like DMT release or something? Like,
you
I don't
sound
know.
like those maesters that don't believe in magic.
I do.
Jaime, are you behind the
right
disappearance of magic?
Yeah, I actually am. I am responsible. I'm also responsible for the dragons disappearing. I feel like I don't know the timeline, but, like, I feel like the doom in Valyria is all tied into this somehow. And I wish that we would ever have answers to that. But I actually don't even think, if all the books are published, I don't think George is ever going to answer what happened in Valyria. I think it's just the doom. Like, it's like you kind of said, it's up for interpretation. It's like a mystery, right? Like, he's not going to just tell you how intricate the apocalypse was.
Well, because that's the thing too. I mean, like, when we in real life study history or whatever, or physics and, like, the outer space, there are plenty of things that we're like, we're not sure.
Well, even think about this, the Bronze Age collapse, which was an apocalyptic event.
Yeah.
No one knows why it happened. There's theories, there's sea people, there's simply just, like, a drought and other things, but nobody knows what happened during the Bronze Age collapse, except society almost, went away. So in a lot of ways, I guess the doom's kind of like that. Like, people have their theories, but no one really knows.
Exactly. And I always say that worlds feel more real when some parts of it still remain unknowable.
I agree. It's why I don't really care for hard magic systems that much. It becomes almost, it's like memorizing my spells in an RPG. Like, I have no interest in that, to be honest. It leaves no wonder.
Yep.
Fascination. Like, I do think that you could do intriguing things with that are compelling.
Well, I mean, I think, like, I guess a hard magic system, as long as it leaves room, much like real world science, is like, we have some pretty solid understanding of how this works that we can, like, a functioning knowledge. But at the same time, like, we're constantly testing it and constantly realizing that, like, it actually doesn't work quite the way that we thought that it did. So, like, a hard magic system where, like, we have been using this and we have observed that it functions this way to the best of our knowledge, but leaving that, like, that room of, like, but we're not totally sure that's the limit of it. We're not totally sure. We think this is why it does this, but we don't exactly know. So you have hard rules as far as we know. But as long as you leave that room for like, but that might not be it, or it might not be quite what we think it is, but so far it functions like this, then it will still feel real and it still leaves that room for wonder.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's like what magic is.
Well, that's what makes it magic as opposed to chemistry or physics.
Yeah,
I
science.
don't know what's happening, but I agree.
We're talking about how hard magic systems are boring unless you leave some room for.
They're not
but
boring.
Are we sure it works like this?
Yeah,
we were saying we don't prefer hard magic systems because we like the how it's ambiguous.
I mean, it's always subjective, right? And it depends on how
Sure.
you do it. Like I love Allomancy and Mistborn, and there is that bit of like, is this exactly how some things always work? And there is enough left open to where it's not always just cut and dry. But also soft magic systems, it's like it can be cool because it's so open and there's so many different possibilities, but also it can feel cheap because
depending
it's open,
on how they use
and you
it,
can kind of just be like, well, it just does this now. You're like, oh, because the story needed it or what?
Yeah, it's all about being very careful. Either way you go.
Well, that's why also my preference tends to be towards very sparingly using magic, whether it's hard or soft. Yeah. Like that if you have because it just to me, like the butterfly effect of a single thing being like different in this universe, which like changes the physics of this universe, that changes everything. And now if you throw in a bunch of different kinds of magic that you use all the time, I'm like, I don't think you've thought through the repercussions of all of those things and how they would affect how people behave, how they function, how they think, how society would be structured, how travel would be changed, how like the economy would be different. Like, I don't think you've thought this through. And so your world feels fake to me.
Or they just don't think about a lot of that because it doesn't matter.
Well, it might matter to some people, Alex.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't matter.
Well, if their world doesn't matter to them, then their world doesn't matter to me.
Let's go.
Fair point. All right, who have we not touched on yet? Have we missed any? I don't think we've missed any POVs.
No, we've hit everything, I think.
All the things, have we?
Well, I mean, all the POVs, yeah. I was deleting my notes as we crossed them off, and I'm empty. So
it doesn't. Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't even remember. Where does this book end with? Who does it end with? I don't even remember.
Bran.
So Bran sees Winterfell burning, but knows that the crypts are the real Winterfell, and that they will last just like he will. Jon kills Corn half-hand and is kind of a cliffhanger ending. Mm-hmm. And Tyrion is recovering and sends away the maester that Cersei sent, that he was following the queen's orders, and he's like, get out of my room.
Yeah,
I don't want your milk of the poppy or whatever else is in it.
Give me wine.
And he said, Podrick, give me some wine. Get me a new maester. I'm out of this.
He downs all the wine.
And you can see immediately that Tyrion's in like a frantic state of paranoia.
Yeah. So where do you leave Theon? Because he like wakes up afterwards, right? Like, don't we get some chapters after Ramsay takes Winterfell, or no?
No, he's knocked out. Winterfell's taken. So there's a lot of cliffhangers in this book.
Yeah.
Which George seems to love.
I mean, every ending chapter is basically a cliffhanger.
Yeah, Theon is a cliffhanger. I think Catelyn's last. Oh yeah, Catelyn's last chapter is it appears that she killed Jaime because she asked for her sword, Brienne's sword.
I mean, that's not gonna.
Right, but in the book, if it was at release, we'd be going, do you think she killed? I wish I could like read these books as they release. Like, I think I would have been really cool.
At the same time, though, like knowing Catelyn and what she's like, I don't think I would have ever believed that. I'd be like, well, this is meant to be like to trick you, but of course she didn't kill.
But also, if you just read or watch anything, it's like if you don't show me a body, you don't see it happen. It didn't happen.
Well, that's
unless
fair.
It's the TV show Game of Thrones, where it cuts to black when Brienne kills Stannis and he actually dies.
But in 1998 and 2000, you might have believed it.
That's what I said. I mean, it was just like knowing what Catelyn is like as a person. Like Catelyn's character. I was just like, she wouldn't.
Her mind at the time had to have been pretty rough, though, because she had just found out that her Rickon and Bran had died.
Yeah, but she is the one that constantly says that she wants the girls back, and she knows that Jaime's the only way that she can get her girls back.
Yeah, that's fair.
And if she's lost children, she's gonna hang on to even more to the ones that she's got left.
He's just antagonizing her so much that I remember feeling like
It's like talking about having sex with her.
Yeah, and he talks about pushing Bran out the window and saying, "I wish he would have died."
When he talks about him being more honorable than Jamie or than Ned.
Ned.
Yeah.
And
which I always love.
If you think about it,
yeah,
I've only been
true.
with one.
Yeah, that was pretty low below there by old Jamie boy. He
Is
also
that the line that triggers her to be like, "Bran, give me my sword"?
and he's also being super honest.
Oh yeah, it's the
And
most
then
honest in the
says-
entire thing.
But then he says that dagger that went to kill your son was not Tyrion's. He said, "If I wanted your son dead, I would have went and killed him myself."
Yeah.
So now, as readers, if we don't know, who then tried to kill Bran, and the dagger must have belonged to Peter Baelish.
Yep.
Well, also the amount of times that Tyrion is like glaring at him over that dagger.
Yeah. And also now looking back on it, it's so obvious that Tyrion wouldn't have bet against Jaime ever.
Yeah,
It's like,
for sure.
why didn't I realize that when I first read? This book's great.
Yeah.
I think it's
It
one of the
is.
best sequels.
Who else? I guess it's Sansa. Where did we leave
Yeah,
with her?
we talked about Sansa, but not much.
I'm just saying, where did we leave with her?
She leaves off where Marjorie Tyrell is going to become Joffrey's new bride, and it's like
yeah, we talked about that.
she
yeah.
might be free. Who knows?
It's like Marjorie took no time at all to do that. It was like Renly dies to a shadow. She's just like,
Hi.
I'm out.
Yeah, Marjorie Tyrell's like an interesting character because like you could hate her for being such a like
Super sneaky,
She's
being
opportunist.
yeah, that's a good way to put it. Opportunist.
manipulative.
She's also going to put Joffrey in check. So it's like she's kind of good and she befriends Sansa. So it's like I switch between Sansa and Sansa. I can't. Roy's ruined me.
I think it's Sansa.
Szechuan sauce, yeah. But Sansa is befriended kind of by Marjorie Tyrell, and even if it is superficial, it still is like it's a relief
For sure. I think normally I would say Sansa, but since everyone on the show is also English and say Sansa, it's just
Well,
Sansa.
it kills me the ones that can't pronounce the R in Arya's name and they say Arya.
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 Like it's like that's the moment you realize George R. R. Martin is not English because he wrote a name like Arya. So you say it as an American, it's Arya, but if you're English, Arya. So it's like you're gargling.
Oh, George pretend to be British. What a lad. I'm trying to remember where Samwell leaves off. We don't have a Samwell chapter here, right? No.
You don't get a POV. I mean, you have the whole Craster's Keep, which of course ends differently because they don't get kicked out the way that they did. Like Jon doesn't sneak up on Craster giving his tribute. It's Gilly just tells them about it, and Sam is just kind of like, "Well, we have to take her because she's a girl and she talked to me."
Samwell. What a god.
So you don't get too much more than that. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you get really much more of Sam other than that little glimpse of him in Jon's chapters.
Yeah. And him talking about the Citadel scrolls. He actually mentions the Children of the Forest, which is pretty cool. I think that's going to definitely play a role when he gets to the Citadel and he's talking to people and however that ends up tying up.
Well, I mean, Bran also talks about the Children of the Forest with his name.
Lewin.
Because he is a green seer, so.
And Jojen, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the reads are fascinating, and the fact that his father sent him, and it was like right at the time, like where Ned died. It's like
very convenient timing.
Yeah, Howland Reed is like he's the only other person that knows about the birth.
Yeah, he's a total wild card in the story.
He really is.
Like what his play will be.
I like the theory. Actually, I don't like the theory that he's the High Septon.
Really?
Because the High Septon comes out of nowhere. Well, the High Septon brings like all these followers and stuff.
Why would Howland do that though?
To get revenge on Cersei for his best friend. There's also a lot of other stuff like where people link the way he state all this stuff, but we could talk about when we do Feast. I don't actually subscribe to it, and I would be disappointed if he was.
Yeah.
One, because I think that that's an interesting storyline by itself, and two, Howland I think has to play a much bigger role than that.
Yeah,
some pettiness. Like I think he has to interact with Jon, possibly.
I mean, he has to be the one that tells Jon, right?
Yes.
Well, in the show.
The show sucks at the end of it, okay?
You mean when they cut away?
They forgot Howland Reed even existed, and
It hurts.
Like, who else would tell Jon?
The
Like,
crack.
how would
Samwell.
How would say? Yeah, but Sam would have to find out.
I agree. The only way would be if Samwell found somehow at the Citadel. But that still doesn't make much sense, right? Like, I just don't see it happening. So
Howland would have to interact with him at some point and let him know.
Yeah.
Or we never know. Who knows? Maybe it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I feel like it has to, though.
Derry said Howland Reed is married to hiding Ashara Dane, who is Mira's mama. I think Ashara Dane is probably dead, but she could also, I don't know. Ashara Dane's very interesting. She's mentioned way too many times to be just some throwaway I killed myself over Ned character. She's important. She's probably the Septa that's with young Griff, if I had to guess. But
see, I gotta brush up on all my Song of Ice and Fire theories because I lived on them forever, and I've forgotten so many of them.
We're about to get into the Storm of Swords. We start seeing a lot form, but 4 and 5 are where the bread and butter's at, really.
Yeah.
Because so many new things are introduced. It's going to be...
Which again is like, sir,
sir,
we're supposed to be bringing us into the conclusion here.
Do you think he was just having so much fun that he was like, I'm just going to keep going?
I mean, probably. But also, it's like at a certain point, it gets convoluted in your own head. Because Robert Jordan was doing the same thing. Like, if you read up to Knife of Dreams, the next book was supposed to be A Memory of Light. And he wanted it to be like 1,400 pages long and be the end. And that got split into 3 books that are all like 1,000 pages each to flesh out the ending. It's like where that book leaves off. It's like, how are you going to just do this in a book?
Yeah.
Like, you can't. So.
Yeah, and it may be some, I also wonder, because Robert Jordan and Gurm were apparently friendly, I wonder if he saw what Jordan was doing and was like, oh, I can go bigger.
I mean, that's probably what it just, as he was telling it, was probably just like, oh, I want to do this. Oh, I want to do this. Oh, I could do this. This means this. And like, just kept going.
George R. R. Martin writing was literally the same as Jimmy is during the lives, where he was just like,
his head just
what
kept
if that would be good.
I mean, I'd like to think me and Gurm have a lot in common. I have a conductor hat, so does he.
Beard.
I can't grow a beard, but I did buy a paste on one for when I host.
Hey, maybe George's isn't real.
I mean, it's pretty bad. It's patchy. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it was taped on.
Yeah,
Jewel and Zeph showing up?
Beard.
Certainly.
I'm sure.
Dude wanted to put a moat around his house, and they were like, sir, you can't do that. And he was like, what do you mean I can't do that?
Yeah.
I think we've covered it. I think we've covered Clash of Kings.
Now I'm just thinking about like the whole Arthur Dane thing.
It's interesting. When you look at how many, Starfall and the Morning Star, all this stuff, like the Dornish references, it's like, it's almost too on the nose where you're like, something had to have mattered there.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think of like if he's actually dead or not.
It doesn't make sense that Ned or Howland Reed could kill him. It doesn't make any sense. And Corn Halfhand was a pretty studious guy. And if he knew that Lyanna, was in love, it's hard to say though, because like Ned's coming because he thinks Lyanna's being captured, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, how does Corn relay like, no, they're actually in love? It's messy. It doesn't add up.
Yeah, it's weird.
Ned's sword skills are also very ambiguous.
Yeah, for sure.
Like he doesn't battle Jaime at all in the books. We don't see him at hand-to-hand combat. He was clearly Robert's second, right?
Mm-hmm.
Him and Aaron. But that doesn't mean shit.
The only combat you see him in is when they come at him outside the brothel.
Yeah.
And then Jaime rides away.
Yeah. And Ned takes his horse falls on his leg instead of being stabbed through the leg.
Yeah.
Oh, one thing I wanted to mention. Well, what was really interesting to me that I had forgotten is that Renly is described as looking just like Robert.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like he's like another Robert, like he's a splitting image of Robert.
Yeah.
Which is why I think a lot of people probably like him because he's a lot more jolly than Robert and more friendly, but still has like that burly kind of look to him. That was something I had forgotten. I thought that he was very soft faced and all this stuff, but he wasn't. He had the Baratheon look, where Stannis did not look like his brothers.
No, Stannis is
The man
also just like grizzled and
Stannis
sad.
is Stannis. There's something like so like childish about Stannis, where he's just like, but it's not fair. It should be mine. And you're like, get over it.
Yeah, it's very elementary and very black and white.
Well, we're at about 2.5 hours, and I think
we have an hour and a half to go.
There's probably more we could talk about, I'm sure, but I think we've done a pretty good job of talking about the Crown of Kings.
A crown
of Kings. This is where I'm at in life now.
Are you the narrator of the book?
Bran.
Oh my god. A Clash of Kings is the book I'm, of course, talking about. Because The Crown of Kings isn't the book that we read. So
not the one I read. I must have. It's good it lined up so well.
Thank you all for watching. Several of you stuck through this entire thing. I appreciate you.
Me and Jimmy.
That's incredible. Wow. Okay. I guess we're just patting ourselves on the back now. That's happening? Okay,
yes,
cool.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's getting late. I am ready for bed. It's 11:30, and we've been talking for 2.5 hours.
It's only 8:30.
Listen, California.
On the best coast.
Yeah. The Beast Coast, East Coast. Does that work?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thanks everybody for watching. We will be, I believe, on Jimmy's channel for the next book, A Storm of Swords.
I don't think we figured out when.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. It'll be towards the end of December, obviously before New Year's. Maybe that. I have the whole week off after Christmas, so I'm open anytime then. We can figure it out. I'm really excited for this, man. This is my favorite book, by the way. Like Storm of Swords is my favorite book of all time. So
I have the whole week. Is it before or after? I'll have to look. I have one of those weeks, the whole week off. But
take off after.
As long as it's always at night like this, for me, I'm fine whenever. So unless it's like Christmas. Like
Alex is actually coming here, and we're gonna do it. We're gonna be in the same room.
Oh,
you're gonna be in the gym.
We should do that.
Alex does love the workout.
I'll be in the gym as in Jimmy Nuts. Is that what you're saying?
Jazzercise while we talk about it.
I've been thinking about doing a video like books for biceps, and Storm of Swords would be like one of them. I'll show myself out.
If we could swing that would be sweet. We'll talk about it. We'll see.
Hell yeah!
I have to convince my wife that I'm driving up to
Maryland
for a night to talk about a book.
I have plenty of scotch.
There you go. All right. We'll figure out the next date. It'll be on Jimmy's channel at some point in time in December. So thanks again for watching. Until next time.
Ta-ta.
Wave.
Winter's coming.